Welcome.
It's great to be here, Jason.
Another wonderful episode of Sunday with Charles right here, live from NYC HQ. I think I've got a handle on this camera freezing up problem. Hopefully that won't be affecting us at all during today's show, which of course we're going to be exploring Clinton shenanigans in the wonderful neighbor to the north, the great and excellent country of Canada.
Indeed, indeed.
And I've put together this graphic for us today, Charles, that I know you like. You're always so pleased with the graphics, and I am doing my best to keep them interesting. You know, Charles, before we get too deep into the myriad issues that I know you will be raising today, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's going on in alternative media and everything. I don't know if you caught the program last night, but we had our good friend Charles Walton on. Now, Charles Walton is a YouTuber. He's very popular, and he was doing a lot of work on the Las Vegas investigation and had recently turned his attention toward the Florida shooting. And he had posted a video about this student at the high school who's been very vocal spokesperson. He's been appearing on CNN. Charles had information that this kid's father was former FBI. There were a bunch of questions about him. Put up a video about it, and YouTube pulled the plug on him. And I'm sure you'll recall when we did some reporting with our friend Hector Carmona and all of the horrible horse abuse that Hector's been reporting on, we got a copyright strike on the Crowdsource the Truth YouTube channel, which caused us to lose the ability to live stream on YouTube for 90 days. Now, of course, we just showed the logo for the Spanish Writing Institute. Hector presented his evidence that the Spanish Writing Institute is allegedly involved in horse abuse. Now, if anything that we've said on this program about the Spanish Writing Institute is untrue, I invite the Korn law firm in Austria or anyone from the Spanish Writing Institute to correct us, and we'll run a retraction. But for them to just go directly to YouTube and pull that copyright thing is really an abuse of civil action, and I think, frankly, an abuse of the First Amendment that YouTube really should be standing up for the creators to avoid. But what we've done sort of to prevent this sort of thing happening in the future, Charles, is that I've begun posting on DTube. Now, DTube is a decentralized, blockchain, as I understand it, driven video hosting service that's similar to YouTube, but rather than being controlled by a single company like Google, DTube, as I understand it, is hosted across a range of computers across the internet. So if anything that I said in the Charles Walton interview last night upsets YouTube and tries to get them to, smash Charles or mine or yours or anybody's First Amendment rights, they can watch it on DTube. There are some interesting and strange things I've noticed about DTube. This is a platform that some of our friends who claim to have links to the CIA have been pushing us towards, and the second I got on there, they start putting strikes on the videos. So the question now becomes, if these individuals are trying to post this as a democratized, censorship-free platform, I think we need to treat each other with respect and dignity on that platform, because if they're just trying to lure me to some platform that they control or that they have a strong influence over, this could be equally or even more dangerous than allowing Google or somebody else to control what's said. We'll have to keep our eyes on this.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now, the other thing is, we've got a very special guest today, Charles. We are bringing on to the live stream here, I'm sorry, I almost forgot the other important factor that we're doing to mitigate YouTube's ridiculous abuse of our First Amendment rights. Now, many people have heard me say that I previously was the proprietor of a production company. I've done work in Hollywood and elsewhere. Production company, of course, is called 21st Century 3D. I've mentioned it many, many times here on Crowdsource the Truth. And what I've done is I've actually rearranged things so that our live broadcasts are now being hosted on the 21st Century 3D YouTube channel. So this is a little bit like a cream of wheat box in that it's like us watching us live, but you can see that we're now able to get live chat comments, and we've got 29 people watching on the live stream that's hosted on the 21st Century 3D YouTube channel. So if people want to subscribe to 21st Century 3D on YouTube, they can watch some of the videos that I've put together historically in my previous career. They can see YouTube has discontinued its support for the 3D format that used to make it such a great platform for 3D, but you can still watch the videos in 2D. And for the next 30 days, while the ban stays, unless I can get YouTube's lawyer to actually call me back, I've also got a call into the lawyer from Austria who put this ridiculous copyright strike on. But for now, people can watch the Sunday with Charles live streams on 21st Century 3D. I will not be redirecting Crowdsource the Truth content to 21st Century 3D beyond these live streams. They'll still be hosted on the regular Crowdsource the Truth YouTube channel after our live broadcasts. But for people who enjoy commenting and chatting in the live stream on YouTube, they can still get Sunday with Charles live on Sundays at 3 p.m. through that method. So whatever it is that they're going to try to do to silence us, Charles, I assure you that I will find a way around it. And lastly, I want to bring on our special guest for today. He's an expert in all things Canada, and people have heard him in some pre-recorded broadcasts previously on Crowdsource the Truth. But we've got King James with us for the first time ever on Sunday with Charles. King, how are you?
Just great, Jason. Welcome to Canada, everyone. I first want to say what an honor it is to be with the great Charles Ortel on for Sunday. Looking forward to today. It's amazing work that you guys do, and just keep up the fight.
King, we're delighted to have you on for the first time. And I know, you and I have discussed offline that Mr. Ortel, of course, is a guest of the highest magnitude. We hold him in tremendously high regard. Charles is obviously very out there in terms of how he presents his information. Charles is, freely walking the streets of New York, as am I. And so, we are of the mind that although we recognize people's need to keep their anonymity, there's a certain amount of healthy skepticism that goes along with these anonymous sources. King, what can you say about that? You've been anonymous here with Crowdsource the Truth since you were first introduced many months ago.
Interesting comment. When we first started, it was in August, and at that time, if you remember, I didn't expect to even be here more than one post, because I really thought people would look at what I said and just laugh it off the set. And I must say that the audience has been very gracious, very supportive, and we seem to keep coming back for more. And I told you several times, when it comes to Canada, when it counts, I will be here. And we need to know that we're all in the same struggle together. And we need to thank, again, Charles Ortel for the work that he's done, because he's exposing, as you call it, the largest criminal organization maybe on the planet, next to the mafia. So I just got to say that to everyone out there, nothing special, okay? We're going to beat this, each one of us, one step at a time. And so when you feel ready, you step up, because it's going to take all of us, not just one, not just two, all of us to make this happen.
And King, is there anything you want to tell us about your secret identity before we proceed?
Well, the funny part is that my name is James. And so my friends call me Jim. And so when he picked the name King James, well, it just kind of made sense. But it goes against everything that I stand for, because I don't believe in monarchies and I don't believe in the Lord caste system. But it was a lot better than what Big Eyes you have. So
that was already taken, right?
Yeah, that was it. So my name is Jim, and I'm from New Brunswick.
Are you ready for me to reveal, Jim?
Yeah, go ahead.
There he is, King James, in the flesh. Lovely to have you with us, sir.
Charles, thank you so much. Again, it's an honor to be here. And I'm just telling everyone that the reason I'm here is because you've been so kind to me. And I don't expect to have everyone when we discuss things, but for the most part, you know, I keep saying free speech, not hate speech. We have a great group, and it grew from 10,000 to approaching 50,000. And a lot of it has to do with this show, and plus the quality of operation that you do, Jason. It's amazing to see how you've evolved from, well, let's just say an amateur into the big leagues, to be kind. And it's amazing how your format has attracted great people of great integrity, and I'm just proud to be part of it.
Thank you so much, Jim. And I've been using up a lot of time, Charles. I apologize. We're going to get right to the presentation because I know that everyone wants to hear what we've got this week in the episode we have titled Dudley Do Wrong. Of course, the famous cartoon Canadian Mountie. Charles, what should we tell everyone about this episode today?
All right, well, what we're going to do today is focus on the Clintons' early misadventures in Canada through around mid-2010. And this is a very significant period that most people who've been looking at the Clinton Foundation don't quite understand yet. It's significant because Canada's charity laws are very, very strict. And in part because I believe when you look through the memos that are out there on comparing Canadian and American law, the Canadian government has taken the viewpoint that it really wants to be a much bigger actor in society than the American government is in American society. So charitable functions they're not discouraged, but the government would like to perform many charitable functions. And so the paperwork, the disclosures, the approach that Canada takes is very, very different. In addition, when Canadian citizens want to give money to a charity and take a tax deduction against their Canadian taxes, the rules are tougher than in the United States. So we have a history we're going to go through here that may surprise you, King, and may not, but we're hoping that the various government viewers who are watching this show and have been watching this show will see what we're going to show them happen in Canada as exactly what happens around the world. The Clintons tell various government regulators, whether it's the state of Arkansas, the IRS, the Federal Trade Commission in the United States, the Attorney General, Department of Justice in the United States, or the government of Canada, the federal government, or the regional government out there in Vancouver, where one of these charities was very active, or Ontario, another one. They tell them different things. They tell different stories. It's like a man who has 55 mistresses. You know, I'm not bringing up Jason now. I'm just kidding.
I'm not even married. How can I have a mistress?
I'm just kidding. But anyway, so this is a tale that we've told about other countries, France, Norway, Sweden, etc. But we're going to focus today on Canada. And the remarkable thing about this Clinton charity in Canada is that it has done what it has done. It is solicited illegally without disclosing the true state of the Clinton Foundation. It has operated unlawfully around the world. It has taken Canadian government money and diverted it. It has taken...
You misspelled Castro.
It has taken charity, Canadian charity money, and misspent it and likely diverted it. And this is quite a tale. This didn't just happen by accident. This charity has been used as well as a cover for certain people that we're talking, we will name names in this broadcast, to develop vast business interests, to expand their business interests, particularly in some of the most desperately poor countries in the world. So this is really a sordid tale. It's a tale where Justin Trudeau needs to, get on whatever plane he took over to India, come back, detoxify, deworm himself and start focusing on the very serious problems that exist inside his country. He's got a tough choice to make. Does he want to continue to lose with the Clintons and the Obama team, or does he want to win with Donald Trump? And we're going to put him squarely on the hot burner today, talking about what really has been going on in Canada and asking why hasn't he been able, not only why hasn't he been able to catch it, but why is he continuing to support these Clinton charities, knowing everything that people around the world know about them? So that's really the thrust of today's presentation. We can go to the second page here, Jason. And we do this, Jason, your audience is growing so quickly. We always tend to have new viewers who don't necessarily know how we operate. And we like to start each presentation with this slide, it's more or less the same slide, that just explains to our viewers, listen, we are in the business of going around the world and looking at facts that are in the public domain and providing links to our viewers so they see these facts. We form our own analysis, we cross-check things. We are not in the business of taking inside sources from people that we can't check. We look at what's in the public domain and we try to analyze it using the skills that Jason and I and others have that may be at a different level than the skills in the general audience. So that's what we do here. Jason has put together this excellent playlist. I don't know how many hours we're up to now. I think we're like 65 or so hours, but this playlist puts it all in one nice place.
Oh, I feel like I haven't put last week's show in there, but I will.
That's right. But this is a long list of shows that makes it very accessible. You can go in, you can see what we've done in the past. We're trying to do at least one show a week. We may actually step it up now that so many things are happening. But here for you is an amazing amount of background. If you're a new government, say the government of Austria, or maybe finally the government of Australia, or government of Germany, if you're new to this, you know, and you've heard snippets about what may be going on with this Clinton Foundation, if you want to save yourselves tremendous amounts of money and time, watch all these videos. Start at the very beginning, and you will see that we have provided a treasure trove of information to any government that wants to get seriously into the business of getting their money back.
You know, speaking of business, Charles, I want to remind everybody, even though I haven't yet put last week's episode into the playlist, we do have some lovely merchandise available featuring the graphic that was really one of the more popular ones that I've created. Last week's show, of course, The Secret Policeman's Ball. And we've got an example of this wonderful item right here. I've already ordered it. Charles, you know, coffee tastes much better out of one of these handsome mugs, so people can go to redbubble.com and order that if they want to get one of those. And it does help, you know. Charles, I always say at the end of the program, Crowdsource the Truth is a community-sponsored news resource, and now that we're coming under attack with the First Amendment and YouTube polling, we're looking at alternative ways to get our information out, and definitely sponsorship is going to be greatly appreciated even now more than ever. People who want to become monthly sponsors can go to patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. But let's get back to the presentation.
So if we can then go to page 3, what we try to do each week is it's actually a discipline that I use in my personal life. On a Sunday, I like to think about what happened in the recent week and decide what's important, what isn't important, and then at the end of this presentation we always think ahead to what might happen in the coming week. So this was really a wonderful week. I don't know how many, Jason, if you had a chance, you were very busy, or King, if you had a chance to watch Trump's amazing extemporaneous performance at the Conservative Political Action Conference. We've provided a link. I hate to promote Time magazine, which is not even a cartoon at this point. Mad magazine is far better, National Enquirer is far better, but here you have a whole transcript of his extemporaneous speech. And I really do think, you know, it's presumptuous of the political experts to say that what they need to do is attempt to manage a man who pulled off the most stunning upset against first the establishment and the Republicans, and then second against someone who had rigged her own primaries and thought she'd rigged the general election. You're going to manage this guy? I mean, he knows how to win. He could teach more about winning to the political class than any of them have ever understood. So I commend this transcript and the speech itself. It's really worth over an hour of watching to understand this person. He's really something.
If you want to get tired of winning, that's something you can
Right.
take a look at.
Right. So we have provided in the second link, and we are going to go into each one of these links, the indictment that came out on the 22nd. And again, it's worthwhile reading this to get a flavor. Until I'd gotten into this, I really hadn't understood the way in which these indictments work. Every single one of them has on the right-hand side, in a summary, lists the various charges that the government has identified. And my initial reaction when I saw this is what I would be doing is I would do a global delete and replace, taking Gates and Manafort out and putting Bill, Hillary, Chelsea, Clinton, the trustees, the accounting firms, et cetera, because this is a great bunch of things to start with. I mean, there are a lot more we will be getting into. We have gotten into in the past, but subscribing to false United States individual income tax returns, of course they did that. They also did corporate tax returns, the Clinton Foundation stuff. Failure to file reports of foreign bank and financial accounts, of course the Clintons have done that. Bank fraud conspiracy, start in 2004, 5, 6, 7, you've got massive bank fraud conspiracy. You've got bank fraud in those years when they obtained loans on false pretenses and didn't account for the monies properly and diverted the monies, stole the monies. This is just a starting place. And you know, this explains what the government believes may have been the case with regards to Manafort and Gates, and it closes with a forfeiture notice. Now, should the Clinton Foundation frauds be prosecuted the way I think they will be prosecuted, we're not going to be talking about forfeiture. We're going to be talking about massive penalties and fines and restitution, not simply forfeiture. This is just you give up your ill-gotten gains. Nuh-uh. We're going to get the money back, then you're going to be subject to penalties, fines, and other offenses. And that's, you know, a message now to the long group of people. One of the past times, we won't get into what it was, when I had to do something like this on a smaller scale, I used to great effect the question, think of the number of people who have known about this fraud and covered it up. Every single one of those persons is guilty, potentially guilty of participating in this conspiracy, and therefore subject to criminal penalties and sharing in the pain, the financial pain, the mammoth financial pain that is headed their way.
Wow.
So it would behoove those who have overlooked this in the past to get legal counsel and start talking to your counsel about how you might mitigate the pain that is definitely coming your way inside the United States and in multiple countries.
Charles, we should start like a hotline where people who are in this position could call in and get the best level advice from you.
I'm not a lawyer. I mean, you probably have to call Celino and Barnes or somebody, one of those. That's a
Perkins Coie.
Yeah, not Perkins Coie. No. So, in the third link, we have this wonderful publication, and they've been kind to me, featured me a few times. Zero Hedge has a story about this idiotic Democratic memo. And you know what's really so disappointing, it's like when you were in school, and I remember this happened in my case in 7th grade, is when we started at a new school separating the people who would be in honors classes from the people who would be in the normal classes, and you had a lot of people, even back then in 1868 or whatever it was, when I was in 7th grade, you had people who were great at doing trash talking, you know, before the decision was made. And that's basically what the Democrats are doing here. It's a lot of trash talking, trying to defend the indefensible. I mean, we are going to put this timeline together of what actually happened, you know, of how the Republican establishment losers in the primary campaign may have decided they were going to stick the knife into Donald Trump, you know, well before he emerged as a leading contender. We're going to figure that out, because there are records of all that, and people are being called to testify, and lawsuits are going to arise, and Tom Fitton is one of the very dedicated people who's putting a lot of heat on this. We're going to figure this all out, and this Nunes memo, not Nunes memo, this Shifty Adam Schiff memo, you know, it's heavily redacted, which means, you know, portions are blacked out, but people like Inspector General Horowitz who has been very quiet ever since his report was tendered, I believe, on January 12th, 2018. He's been awfully quiet.
Wasn't that a preliminary report?
No, I think he tendered his whole report, and it's now being studied. And there's a summary of his whole report, but his whole report is, I believe, with evidence over 1 million pages.
And where are we at with I.G. Horowitz? We've had Dr. Stevens said he's going to be the liquid plumber of the swamp. Other people have said he's a swamp creature. I don't know what to make of.
I think if Donald Trump were not president, and if Donald Trump had not been winning, as he appears to be winning right and left daily, I would have one viewpoint. But I mean, you are going up against a tsunami here if you're taking on Trump. I mean, he does have another 3 years left. And from what I could tell, I said it on this program about the taxes when the tax bill was first approved. I immediately said it is going to work very well. Don't believe these idiots coming out of Washington, D.C., the academics were saying, we'll use static scoring and that's going to show a gigantic deficit. Don't believe that, because that's not what's going to happen. And now look what's happening.
I thought Trump has 7 years left.
Well, unless he pulls his G, in which case the leader of China has just apparently been given a lifetime opportunity to run that country. So
what a wonderful opportunity. When it knocks, you must answer.
I guess.
Now, Charles, I don't mean to proliferate fake news, but have we heard anything else about that Karen McDougal story? I feel like if it had any legs, that would be all over the place.
Sorry, Karen McDougal?
The woman who was the Playmate of the Year, who her friend wrote a letter to somebody about maybe Mia Farrow or her son or somebody knew something about something happened to Donald Trump.
No, I haven't heard anything at all about it. That was 2 weeks ago?
Last week?
Was it? Well, a week ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that was the woman who came forward and said that she had another woman who came forward and said she had an affair with Trump.
He's a friend of the woman who allegedly had the affair, but I've heard nothing about it. I feel like CNN, MSN, why didn't Rachel Maddow have a mini-series about that?
Well, she must have been on vacation.
Right.
Yeah. I don't think there's much weight to that set of allegations, but.
Right.
Why don't we go back into the main page here, and we will get in shortly to Canada. I'd just like King to go through these links quick. Last night, our friend Jeanine Pirro had a phone interview, and the pros call them phoners, but they had she had a phone interview with Donald Trump, who, here's the Huffington Post savaging the interview, saying that Donald Trump abused Jeanine Pirro, and I have met Jeanine Pirro several times. I've been on her show several times. I don't think Arnold Schwarzenegger would be able to. Yeah. I mean, Jeanine Pirro is not physically a very large human being, but she's a towering intellect. She pulls no punches. She's got a, highly tuned BS detector. And she, I thought, did quite a good job with the president, who was punching back.
Well, she definitely strikes me as somebody that you don't want to get yelled at by.
Exactly. That's right. Or if you do, that you have a handy bottle of, maybe several bottles of Chardonnay or whatever your poison is. But anyway, that was, I thought, a very good technique. Then there's another lady I've come to know, I've never met her in person, named Clarice Feldman. And I would commend both the American Thinker, I'm starting to write a few pieces for them, I did one last week, but Thomas Lifson, who runs the American Thinker, and Clarice Feldman is one of the star writers for the American Thinker, is a lawyer with deep experience, I think, in the Department of Justice. She's also very, very funny in her writing. So anytime Clarice Feldman writes something on the American Thinker, it's something that's worth reading. And so here she's going and suggesting that what's really happening is Donald Trump has been serious for quite a while now to try to take down the worst abuses within the deep state. That's the real battle here. And that's what's going to play out here. It's not going to go smoothly. The deep state has a lot of resources and is not actually all that well regulated, if it's regulated at all. And they kind of seem to believe they operate above national laws. But nonetheless, I think Donald Trump and his administration have decided it's time, well past time, to regulate the deep state, and that is happening.
Well, and it's interesting also that this is talking about a different person who also has a 4-letter last name beginning with H and double letters in it. I don't know, that's just a coincidence, I'm sure, but telling him that CNN needed him to stick to the script. Now, this is exactly what our friend Charles Walton has been basically kicked off of YouTube for reporting on, that CNN is scripting people to say things the way they want them to. I haven't ever given you a script, have I, Charles?
Good luck with that.
Right. King, you're never speaking according to a script when I've had you on the program, are you?
No, because it's always 11:30 at night.
Well, point being, you know, we're trying to bring people real news here, and if CNN has their shooting survivors on a script, I think I agree with this article here from American Thinker. I think Clarice Feldman could be onto something, that CNN is giving out scripted news. Very odd.
Right. Now, there's another person who we follow each other on Twitter called Katika. If we hit this, I hope this link works here. I don't know if you hit the right one.
Is that the
no.
wrong one?
Yeah, that one. It may not work, but
let's try it like this. Yeah, it seems like something is missing from that link, but we'll give it a shot. What if we go here? Anything?
Well, I don't know. When I did it before on my page, it would open up.
Something seems to be introduced, a little bit of a, we'll have to.
Well, suffice it to say, actually, if you just go into Twitter for a second.
Sure.
Thank you. And then punch in, to search, just punch in Katica.
And people should also, of course, be following you on Twitter at Charles.
I would appreciate that, yeah.
And it's Katica, like that?
Yeah, that one.
Whoops.
Yeah, you got it. I mean, the one you hit. Yes, this is a very smart young lady, if that's her picture, who is all over. She's way ahead of the pack, generally speaking. She's a very smart analyst, and she had noticed and said, I guess she sent me a message, a Twitter message, saying that, a direct message, saying that Robert Mueller had met in the White House April, I want to say 26th or thereabouts, 2016, when he was still working for Wilmer Hale, the law firm that I think has got some major league issues. He somehow was meeting in the White House, and this is just around the time that the dossier, or at least the information that Paul Singer had prepared for the Never Trumpers, was being transferred over to the Clinton team. And so what was Robert Mueller doing inside the White House? And if he was involved in that process, does that not mean that maybe he's conflicted in this whole special counsel selection process that occurred in 2017? And Katica noticed this. She and others are on this trail. I think you're going to hear news about this in coming days and weeks. This Katica person and the team of people with her are so persistent and helpful and great, like the conservative treehouse people, Sundance. Really, really good stuff. So this is a shout out to Katica.
Katica on Twitter there.
It's
interesting. She's also got pinned to the top of her Twitter feed this interview in which Chuck Schumer, I think, issues a veiled threat to President Trump. And I actually asked Mr. Schumer about that on an Amtrak train. He was very dismissive.
Yeah, he should have stayed in his family business, which I believe is catching rats. So here in Australia, I don't know how many people watched the press conference that I thought was very well done of Malcolm Turnbull together with Donald Trump on Friday. And this is significant because our friend Michael Smith, the intrepid investigative journalist and former detective in Australia, is in Australia as we speak, preparing to bring charges against the former foreign minister for corruption, Julie Bishop. And I'm sorry, somebody Gillard. And there is a lot of activity, just as there is up in Canada. There's a lot of activity in Australia. People who don't like the corruption that has been ongoing and does involve the Clintons and the left, which is ascendant, unfortunately, in Australia. So this was an interesting press conference. This is a big year for Australia and the United States. It marks the 100th anniversary of our joint military alliance, starting with World War I. And so for the Australians, this Turnbull, Prime Minister, appeared to be, really interested in staying on the right side of Donald Trump. If you want to remain on the right side of Donald Trump, Mr. Turnbull, you're going to stop messing around. You're going to stop obstructing Michael Smith's inquiry into why the Australian government has given close to $100 million to a crooked set of frauds around the world, all tied into the Clinton Foundation, and why the Australian government continues to allow former ministers to put even more money into crooked foundations and education foundations. So this is going to be front of mind, front and center in the next several weeks and months.
We've been learning a lot, Charles, from Harmon Wilfred about how the Five Eyes alliance between the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom is able to exert deep state power across continents, across each of those nations, in many ways as a single unit, and oppress somebody and persecute and prosecute someone like Harmon for trying to expose some of the very mechanisms that these guys might be using in terms of deep state banking tactics and whatever. As a matter of fact, Harmon has so much information on this that he and I are talking about starting what is going to be either a series or at very least a mini-series where he's going to be covering all this information that he's been accumulating for nearly 20 years.
I think it's a great idea. He and his brave wife, Carolyn Dare, and I think you may know that name, King James, Dare Foods up in Canada, is, anyway, that's a great idea, Jason, to do that series. Justin Trudeau, unfortunately for him and for the Canadian people, allowed, I'm joking now, whoever planned that Scooby-Doo bus to be used by Hillary Clinton was arranging this trip, I think, to India. I mean, I've been to India 15 times, which I'm not bragging or anything, but I keep track of my travel. And the most recent trip I was there on business was for 90 days in a row. And
where? In India?
In Bangalore, yeah.
Whoa.
And, this normally, state visits by countries as powerful as Canada and the United States, et cetera, they're scripted. People think through things very carefully. You have to just be aware. I mean, if you're an Indian person coming to the United States of America and you haven't been here before, your body is accustomed to germs and heat and mess in India that may not be present in the same way in the United States. So you're going to have likely an adverse reaction coming from India to the United States. And certainly if you are in Manhattan or someplace like that in the United States and you head over to Bangalore for the first time, you could count, and Bangalore is actually not the most challenging of big cities in India because it's high, it's about 2,800 feet above sea level. You're going to get sick. So this, allowing yourself to be depicted like this as the prime minister, what is this? Who was that? Sacha Baron Cohen? I mean, is this a Borat sequel here? I mean, having your prime minister with his family get pictured like this in India? It's ridiculous.
Oh, you're saying from this tweet? Yeah, that is quite ridiculous.
I mean, it's silly. It's really silly.
Wow.
I mean, look at the comment from this person. You see, you make it a little bit smaller. Is it just me, or is this choreographed cuteness all just a bit much now? Also, for your information, we Indians don't dress like this every day, sir. Not even in Bollywood.
Yeah.
I mean, the many times I was in India, people are, some people in the heat may dress like this, but in the main they wear, clothes we're accustomed to seeing, and it just, I don't know. I don't think it projected Canada in the best light. Let's put it that way.
And Charles, there are some comments here on Periscope, people just joining the broadcast right now who may not be aware that Crowdsource the Truth has got a temporary ban on live streaming on YouTube, so people can go to the 21st Century 3D YouTube channel, which I believe if you just search 21C3D on YouTube, it'll take you right there. And I'm going to be temporarily hosting our live streams there until that ban is lifted.
Great. So if we go then to the final link there, actually, on a serious note, the negotiations between Canada and the United States, in particular over NAFTA, are at a very crucial moment. And I know this from some powerful Canadian friends I have, that it is crucially important, more I would argue for Canada than for the United States, but it's crucially important that we get and hold productive negotiations here. And decide if we're going to move away from NAFTA to move to a two-way treaty that is in the mutual interest of both of our countries. And I know that that is, I suspect that a two-way treaty is something that Donald Trump and his team would be much more interested in moving towards. So I have been saying to our Canadian contacts, Jason's and my Canadian contacts, I'll say it to you on air, King James, that if you want to get on the correct side of the Trump administration, work with them on exposing what you know inside Canada about these frauds. We have only one side of the Clinton Foundation frauds in the United States. The Canadian government has extensive records, both at province level, at federal level, and any grants that may have been made to or through the Clinton Foundation. There are definitely records up in Canada of meeting notes and negotiations and concerns or whatever, emails. That information really needs to get out in the public domain as soon as possible, because what we will now get into are some details explaining the massive nature of this fraud and the degree to which people like Frank Giustra and his team and others allied to Frank Giustra appear to have used Clinton contacts to create these resource deals around the world through the operation of their supposed charity, something that is strictly prohibited under US law and strictly prohibited under Canadian law. But the way they seem to get around doing it is by just not disclosing any offensive transactions. And if they don't disclose them, you know, and if they game the system, maybe by having people on the inside of the Canadian government, and the US government. No foul. Exactly. So if we go here, let's just talk about some of the things that are in the public domain. And Jim, I don't know how much of this you already know, but there, we don't need to hit these first two links. Just take it as read that in 2006 and after 2006, Frank Giustra and the Radcliffe Foundation, which is a foundation up in Canada that he is very much involved with, claimed they donated $31 million to the Clinton Foundation in 2006 for, in theory, fighting HIV/AIDS. Now, there are several problems with that. The first problem is that the Clinton Foundation was not authorized to fight HIV/AIDS anywhere, let alone internationally. The Clinton Foundation had not registered to solicit up in Canada. There is a $31.3 million donation that we have exposed in the past, and the link is, don't pull it up, Jason, but it's the second link in Schedule B. In Schedule B, people who are persistent, please don't pull it up, will get to Schedule B and we'll see the $31.3 million amount, which somebody gave. We don't yet know who that person was, whether it really was given, but Frank Giustra is happy to take credit for it. And the first link, again, don't pull it up, is a link to a Judiciary Committee, Senate Judiciary Committee report, which links to, in footnotes, news stories where, you know, Chuck Grassley and the Judiciary Committee clearly believe that Giustra gave $31 million. The New York Times writers who wrote reports clearly believe it. Well, then explain to me how, if they gave if Giustra and Radcliffe gave $31 million during 2006, how then is the donor list that is released on 18 December 2008, and we put that up in the past, how is it that that donor list only shows that Giustra gave between 10 and 25 million as of 2008?
You know, Charles, what immediately comes to mind when you're talking about donor lists was that whole business with NGP Van, and one was a voter list, one was a donor list, and they were doing all these shenanigans with the data. Dr. Corsi was investigating this back in June. George Webb and I were investigating it. I don't know that we ever really got to the bottom of that, but this seems somehow maybe related.
Well, so with a foundation, I was actually yesterday at a meeting of a small foundation I'm involved with. With a foundation, every single major donation that comes into a foundation has a lengthy paper trail associated with it. It's not just the check or the wire transfer. Mm-hmm. There's a back and forth. If you're a responsible donor operating a tax-exempt foundation up in Canada called the Radcliffe Foundation, and you want to route money to the Clinton Foundation, you better make sure that the Clinton Foundation actually is authorized for the purpose you intend to give it money. And you can't just take my word for it. You've got to go check the tax records. Frequently, big donors, a $31 million donor, would say, hey, you know, I want an actual memo from you where you...
Receipt?
Well, more than that, I want an actual representation that you've been operating this charity lawfully at all times and through the date when I'm going to send you the money and afterwards as you use the money. You're going to want, you know, extra representations. And there's going to be records of that in the Radcliffe files, which the Canadian Mounted Police should be able to get. And there's going to be records in their charity filings, their tax filings. And there should be, records in the Clinton Foundation and the Radcliffe Foundation, the Juicer Operations correspondence files. You should have all of that. And you shouldn't say that in 2006, 2 years before you're claiming only 10 to 25 million was received, you shouldn't be saying that you sent 31 million, right? So what happened? How could you have sent 31 million by 2006, but 2 years later, you're only saying you sent between, here it would be 11 to 30 million dollars. It just doesn't make any sense.
But so do you see any possible reason why this NGP van database would be of interest or somehow related to this?
I don't think that's directly related. I don't know, because that's a different set of issues. This is just narrowly on the charity. When Jason Goodman gives $31 million to the Clinton Foundation, Jason Goodman's accountant has records. It says to you, look, bud, you can't just say you gave $31 million, to a charity. You better show me some proof that this charity. So there's going to be stuff that you and your accountants would have. And then the Clinton Foundation absolutely has to keep records, of proving that they received this money. Now, why is a discrepancy like this important? The discrepancy like this is important because it's a prima facie evidence of fraud.
Yeah.
Right? If you cannot keep track of your biggest item in a charity, that is to say donors, information, that's like revenue in a corporation. You don't know the amount and names of your largest customers. Chances are there's something wrong with the company, right? Because typically we care about things like that. Small guys, maybe not. But the big ones, you're going to know. So this is a big discrepancy that's not explained. And in addition, the Clinton list, this was the donor list they refused to give. They only reluctantly gave it out as Hillary was marching down the path to be Secretary of State. And they did it not the way it's required, but they did it in ranges and in misleading ranges that disguised the nature back then of the biggest donor, which at that time was United. They had given the biggest tranche they had was 25 million and up. United had sent at least 300 million. And they didn't want the Clintons, is my suspicion, they didn't want the public and the senators to understand just exactly how much money United had sent, or that United and others were investigating what the hell was going on here because there were all these discrepancies. So staying then narrowly, though, on the Clinton-Juicer Sustainable Growth Initiative, that's an entity we're going to talk about that was formed in 2007 on paper, but was never lawfully organized. Now, you cannot do that under U.S. law. Charles and Jason and Jim up in Canada, we can't get together and, because we're having this broadcast, say, hey, why don't we create a charity? And we'll call it the King James Goodman Ortel Charity Initiative. And let's say, to throw a few other words in, it's sustainable. What else could it be? Even
if you're giving out money to poor kids who
have
been shot up in a high school.
Exactly. You can't just have an informal, loose association. It's called a formless aggregation. You're not allowed to do this under U.S. law. If you want to be a charity, you've got to do it through a legal entity. It can be, most choose a nonprofit corporation in a state, but you can also create an association as a form, an actual form that has a association.
Charles?
Yes?
If I may, there was an article in the Globe and Mail talking about when this was going on and why they picked Canada was because apparently we have some laws on the books that we didn't have to disclose foreign donors. Like they were funneling money in through Canada and they weren't necessarily all Canadians. Can you relay anything to that?
Sure. Basically, you have provisions, and this that allows foreign donors to send money into a Canadian charity and then withhold from scrutiny from the public information concerning the identities of those foreign donors. There is no such protection. There are schools of thought as to whether those laws actually do provide the type of protection that the Clinton team asserts and Juicer team asserts. But there is no protection whatsoever from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police or other elements up in Canada that if they decide there's fraud in a charity, they get everything. as happens here in the United States. You cannot stop the Attorney General of Arkansas from getting every shred of information it may want about a charity that's set up in Arkansas. You can't do what the Clintons love to do and say, well, I might cooperate, or maybe I'll give you some of the records and I'll sue you this way and that. No. The Attorney General shows up at the doorstep and says, produce all of your books and records now. And if you can't do it, then that makes us even more sure that this is a fraud.
Yeah.
So if I could just stay on rhythm here,
sure.
Just go through, because I want to make sure we go through all these points. So later on, the Clinton-Juster partnership and Juster-Radcliffe are each listed as having donated $25 million or more. This is in the most recent link on all the donations. Don't pull it up, Jason, because we've been through it before. And Global Affairs Canada, which I guess is your foreign, the equivalent of either USAID down here or your foreign ministry, is listed as having given more than $25 million to what we will explain is a complete fraud. The Clinton Health Access Initiative never organized properly. Why did Global Affairs Canada give it more than $25 million? When did it give it more than $25 million? What was each specific gift? How was it sent? To whom was it sent? What address was it sent to? What legal entity was it sent to? Who were the people who authorized these payments? Why has there been no investigation of this? If an investigation started and was slowed, who ordered it being slowed? If the Trudeau administration has been obstructing this, the people of Canada have a right to know this, and the people of America are going to know. We're going to shortly find out exactly who has been obstructing the investigation of the Clinton Foundation, and then the dam is going to open up. You know, the Canadians are not going to be able to stop, Trudeau government's not going to be able to stop the truth from coming out. We will know how much money came into this Clinton Foundation, towards this Clinton Foundation, and how it was diverted. And we are going to get to the bottom of it. And we are, I think, in this country, and I hope in Canada, hold the people who are responsible for this fraud criminally and civilly responsible for it. This is not going to go away. And more recently, last year, your government announced a $20 million commitment to some Clinton Health Access Initiative program in Nigeria, of all places, which Nigeria is not a poor country. So, you know, why we're giving money to Nigeria when it has all this oil wealth is beyond me.
It was in August, Charles, for Sexual Health Initiative. And it goes back to the power of the Prime Minister's office. He just decided that he was going to do that on his own. And we read about it afterwards that a $20 million check was paid to this new Clinton initiative.
It's outrageous. It's outrageous, especially because, you know, during 2017, we've talked about this in the past. What happened is that the Clinton Foundation, first of all, was controlled. The main Clinton Foundation was controlled at all times by the Clinton family. Now, we have a species of charity down here which is called a public charity that has to be publicly supported, broadly representative of the U.S. It can't be partisan. It can't be a family operation. The Clinton Foundation is required, for many reasons, to be a public charity. And a public charity is not allowed to concentrate control in the Clinton family. Yet they did exactly that on November 2nd, 2013. They changed their bylaws and then hid that change from the public, most likely from Canada as well. The significance of that is that if the main Clinton Foundation is not a public charity, and it should be, then everything that is controlled by the Clinton Foundation, every charity, is also not a publicly supported charity, which means that this Clinton Health Access Initiative, the entity that your government gave money to in August of 2017, was not earlier a public charity. And so there are all kinds of massive legal defects in the arrangements between your government and Canadian foundations with this Clinton Foundation just across our borders and then around the world. And so why are all these rich people in Canada, Juster and others, why are they taking this kind of risk? Could it be that they saw in arrangements with the Clinton family a way to make even more money than they already had by harnessing the Clintons' international contacts to get crooked business deals around the world? And might we have evidence of that we're going to share with you shortly? And the answer to both questions is, you betcha.
Absolutely.
So if we go to the next page. All right, again, you don't want to believe me, don't believe me. But here's a whole bunch of press accounts And as we're going to be pressed for time, we're almost an hour into this already, and we're not, I don't even think, halfway through the presentation. At leisure, go through and hit each of these links. We're going to be providing these slides up on, is it Crowdsource the Truth, Jason?
Well, the slides will be linked. Yeah, what I'm going to do is when the live stream is over, as usual, I will post this video to the Crowdsource the Truth YouTube channel, and in the description will be the link to the slides. It'll also be available on patreon.com.
Good. So people who want to see the very extensive disclosures that were made, you know, when things were going well, when it looked at first like Hillary might be the first female president of the United States, when Giustra, you know, announced not only the $31 million gift, but he was going to give half of all his future profits to the Clinton Foundation. How generous. You know, that sounds really good, right? I'm going to give half of all my future profits, right? Well, if your future profits are going to be quintupled or, you know, multiplied by 50 because of the crooked connections of the Clintons, you're happy to give half of your ill-gotten gains, you know, to a foundation, especially if it's going to be as laxly controlled as this Clinton Foundation, which has no controls. So these are a series of articles that are very, you know, they're hopeful, they're puffery, they're very pro-Giustra articles that paint him as this noble, far-sighted thinker about, you know, how he's going to improve humanity, and fail to explain at all the degree to which he and his associates are plundering these poor countries around the world in crooked extraction deals of natural resources, including oil and gas and other gold and other things around the world. And we're going to show you a long list of the deals that they have done, but failed to explain in the charity filings. Now, why is this all relevant? Frank Giustra is an independent director of the Clinton Foundation from November 2013 forward. Under U.S. law, if you're going to be an independent director of a foundation, you have to disclose any, not just, there's no monetary, you know, low number that gets you off, any private benefit, any edge, any advantage, any help that you get, you know, getting a deal. And any financial benefit, if you or any member of your extended family, up to your grandfather, your grandchildren, your wife, their family, your kids, all that stuff you have to disclose, and none of that has been disclosed in any Clinton Foundation filing concerning any director, but especially concerning this Frank Giustra, who, you know, it certainly seems to me that what he has been doing here, and he and his team, is they have been using the contacts that the Clintons had and could help burnish around the world with these leaders in places like Kazakhstan and Russia and South America and Central America and Asia, been using the Clinton links to grease the skids to get all these gigantic deals done that we're going to be talking about here.
Well, you mentioned Kazakhstan. We haven't even touched on uranium one yet. And Kazakhstan is obviously, is it the world's largest producer of uranium?
20%.
Yeah. Yeah.
20% was what the uranium one deal.
No, they have 20% of the world's uranium as of last year.
In Kazakhstan.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, King.
So, and they made $3.5 billion. Giustra did on what Charles is referring to, and I'll let him continue on.
Good. Wow. So we'll keep going. The next page is pretty interesting. So, all right. Now, this is, I don't generally do slides this dense, but we're doing it this way because we want to make sure that our extended audience, and now thanks to Jason and his followers at Crowdsource the Truth, I mean, we're regularly getting many more than 15,000 views on these extensive, long presentations. And, you know, I can fly through all this because we've been working on this now almost for 3 years, but for people who are just getting to it, you really have to read every word. I'm not going to read this out loud, but you'll be able to at your leisure. There's several periods that are very important. From 20 January 2001 through 23 March 2004, that's the early phases of the Bill Clinton post-presidency. That's the period when they just ran right over the law. They just said, yeah, we're supposed to be a library and a research facility in Little Rock. How dull is that? You know, I just spent a lot of time getting the heck out of Little Rock. I'm here in Chappaqua. I'm down in Washington, D.C. I don't like Little Rock. I want to fly around the world, save the world. You know, so they just decided they would do that. And I don't know why they felt so comfortable doing all this. They must have had plants inside the IRS, inside the Department of Justice. Now, who could those plants have been?
Maybe Lois Lerner.
Lois Lerner in the IRS, and maybe
Dopey James Comey.
Dopey James Comey. And, you know, I'm beginning to get more and more concerned about Bob Mueller, who was head of the FBI starting September 7th.
He's a huge concern, particularly relative uranium. He was keystering uranium to smuggle it to Moscow.
So in this early period, 20 January 2001 through 23 March 2004, there wasn't even a pretense of any legal form for these activities where they're swanning around the world fighting HIV/AIDS, raising money from governments, Canada included. Then from 23 March 2004 through the end of December 2005, they went through the pretense of creating this subsidiary, Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative, Inc. in Arkansas, but they did that. They couldn't even do that right. First of all, they had Bruce Lindsay do it, and he was, you know, alternatively, in some accounts of the Clinton Foundation, it suggests that Bruce Lindsay was the CEO of the Clinton Foundation in 2003, but on the tax filings for the Clinton Foundation, no such mention. He may just have been the lawyer. He had no authority, no valid legal authority to create this subsidiary to fight HIV/AIDS internationally around the world, because the parent company of the Clinton Foundation was not authorized to do that. And you can't do that. You can't say, you know, well, I'm just a library and a research facility in Little Rock, that's all I can do, and I don't like being so limited, so I'll create a subsidiary, kind of like Enron, you know, and we'll just have this subsidiary over here do whatever it wants to do, and we won't tell anybody that, you know, we don't have the authority to control the subsidiary. You're not allowed to do that, and it really makes me wonder just how intelligent Bruce Lindsay could be. I mean, this is a man who did go to, I think, Georgetown Law School. He was in a senior role in the Clinton White House. He's a consigliere and, you know, a partner in a law firm or of counsel in a law firm. How could you not know this kind of stuff? It's trivial stuff. But nonetheless, they did that. We've been through this before, that in this period, after they formed the sub and filed in April of 2004 for federal tax exemption for this old chai, there's no evidence they ever got it. So that means they were knowingly turned down and nonetheless kept fundraising, accentuated their fundraising, got successful with this big donor we mentioned, Unitaid in Switzerland, and they couldn't say, well, wait a minute, you know, now that you've decided to give us hundreds of millions of dollars, now we want to tell you we don't have the authority to do it. They had to say, well, we got the money without having the authority. Let's just pretend we have the authority. You know?
I thought Unitaid was France.
Unitaid, well, the biggest donor to Unitaid is France, but it's a Swiss-based organization. So the first phase was, let's just do whatever the hell we want to do with no legal authority. Then somebody took them aside and said, you know, it might be a good idea to get some legal authority. They tried for that, and Lois Lerner said, yeah, I don't think so. Yeah. And somebody said no. And now you're in, you know, 2006, and this is when this supposed genius financier, Frank Juster, decides to give $31 million to the Clinton Foundation at some point in 2006 to fight HIV/AIDS. How can he be really, really so smart as to do all these deals around the world and not figure out, you know, this is a pretty small operation, this Clinton Foundation. They just got through defrauding the National Archives and stealing money, creating a research facility and archive in Little Rock with no accounting. You know, they just got done doing that, and because they're that sloppy, this is the perfect place to give them $31 million. I mean, it's just very tough to reconcile, you know, what we know in the public record in the United States with what Juster claims he was doing in 2006. But then through the 31st December 2005 through the 10th of July 2007, and this you get because if you're somebody like me with not much to do and an interest in these kind of issues, you say, you know what, I'm going to look at every freaking country in the world where there could be a record of significance and see what I can find. And so lo and behold, in the United Kingdom, you discover there was an entity called the William J. Clinton Foundation UK. And it was created between May 23rd, 2007 and the 10th of July 2007, just as the Clinton Foundation was likely fighting with Unitaid to prove that it had legal authority to fight HIV/AIDS. Their solution was Bruce Lindsay, and then the CEO of the Clinton Foundation, and this schmo, Andrew Kessel, who agreed to become the chief financial officer on April Fool's Day, 2004, presaging history. They come together and they create yet another subsidiary, and they give the subsidiary the right to fight HIV/AIDS. You're not allowed to do this. And on top of that, what they do, I didn't put it in here because I was just going to recite it from memory. What they do is they define the Clinton Foundation as an entity who was basically a fictitious entity. It was an entity that was, down here we have this idea, you could be Jason Goodman doing business as the Candyman. You're a fictitious entity. The Clinton Foundation, the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation, created a fictitious name on October 5th, 2004, called the William J. Clinton Foundation. And so, well, there we have it. Have you ever seen anything that ugly before, Jim?
Charles, can I ask you another question? Just stop for a second and go back what you just said. Because I don't think people realize just how important that statement is. You're telling me that they're making donations to things that don't exist, or if I interpret you correctly?
That's exactly what I'm telling you. So what happens here, at least in our country, if you're a serious, person like the Clintons are in theory, and you're making tens of millions of dollars a year, and you've got an accountant who's checking your work, when time comes for you to demonstrate that you gave money to a charity, you better have proof that you gave money to a charity, and it's the responsibility of determining whether the charity is in fact a charity rests squarely on the shoulders of the donor. The donor must do diligence and must satisfy the account. You can't recklessly give money to something that you claim is a charity over many, many years and take tax deductions when it's not in fact a charity. And that's exactly what I'm telling you.
I mean, we joke about this place all the time, Charles, but there is a restaurant in it that's obviously a for-profit business, right? I mean, does any other presidential library have that?
Well, so you could do that kind of stuff, but you have to be incredibly careful. I mean, I just went through a board meeting for a small charity yesterday where we went in through rigorous detail, exactly all the board minutes and the pros and the cons. Do I have a second or not? And votes. Why are we doing this? What's the rationale for it? You've got to be deliberate. If you want to create a nonprofit corporation and then enter into perpetual agreements with the National Archives, as they did on the 18th of November 2004, where you represent that you are a validly constituted charity and that you will remain a publicly supported charity, you better well do that, because if you don't, what you're doing as a trustee is you're opening yourself up, Mr. Justra, because you are a trustee, to immense legal liability, which you cannot use the coffers of the charity to pay for. Because the charity must only use the resources of the charity to further its authorized tax-exempt purposes. So if you've committed fraud and now you're in legal trouble and you need teams of lawyers to help you in Canada and South Africa and Tanzania, whatever, you got to pay for all that stuff yourself. You can't burden the charity with that. Now, maybe Mr. Justra is as rich as everybody seems to argue that he is, and he doesn't care. I have a sneaking suspicion he may not be that rich. And nobody...
Not when you're finished with him.
So this step in the UK is yet another step in the chain where you're committing massive fraud. You're traveling to another country, you're misrepresenting the state of the Clinton Foundation of the UK government. And I know the UK government people and media people are watching this broadcast. They've been watching this for a while. And you start looking at this consistent pattern and practice of lying under oath, misrepresenting the state of your foundation, failing to control its operations, getting into areas you're not authorized to do, and then going all over the world at a moment in time where your wife is running for president, she could have been president, it's expensive to raise money for political campaigns. Now you've got Canadian interests, and who knows what foreign countries may have been contributing to the Canadian entity to get on the right side of Hillary Clinton, had she become president of the United States, and then when she lost to Obama, to stay on the right side of Hillary Clinton because she's Secretary of State and can make deals like the ones we're going to talk about, Uranium One and other deals that involve Canada and may involve Australia and other countries, make people a lot of money around the world. So this is a long-standing pattern and practice when we talk about, what was going on with Hillary Clinton, what was happening as she marched towards the White House and then into the Secretary of State's department. We must understand all this. We must understand that Robert Mueller was head of the FBI when this was going on. This is, why did they let an FBI investigation go for 4 years and find nothing from 2001 to 2005 under Robert Mueller's watch? You know, who made that decision to stand down and why? So then, between the 10th of July 2007 and through the 31st of December 2009, as we'll show you momentarily, Clinton and Ira Magaziner and this Bruce Lindsay and the C.F. Schmo, Andrew Kessel, solicited mammoth sums and didn't control them. We don't really know where any of this money actually went. At a moment in time, you were soliciting Canadian currency and Euro currency and Australian dollars, and those currencies are moving like this against the dollar. And the developing world, we're in turmoil here. This is when the credit crisis hits. Developing currencies are plummeting in value. In that environment, you know, when you have enormous volatility in exchange rates, you can mask contributions very easily. You can lie about when you transfer the Canadian dollars into American or other currency and claim you got fewer dollars than you really did get, and pocket the difference. And you know, there's no audit for this period. They have what is called a review, but it's not performed, and the full nature of the flaws are not revealed on the Clinton Foundation website. You only get some of that by going to the California Registry of Trust data and the New York State data, as I've done, and we're going to show you some of this. Sorry, you have a question, Jim?
Yeah, Charles. So you open up another interesting point. Stock currency manipulation. So they could take $100 million Canadian, hypothetically, and put it somewhere else, we'll say for argument's sake, against the euro, and pocket the extra 10 or 15%. And where would that funds go? Like that's a whole separate thing from what you talked about earlier. Like the amount of money these guys are talking, they're talking billions of dollars.
Right. And
just off of the currency fluctuations around the world, they could make unbelievable profits.
Right, which is why this may be something that, Jim, you don't know. In the U.S., I think actually it's the same actually in the U.S. and Canada. A U.S. charity that wants to operate internationally, and I think the same is true, a Canadian charity that wants to operate internationally, must exercise tight control of its international operations from either a Canadian or U.S. base for just this reason, because you know, your tax authorities and our tax authorities know this is not like, you know, giving Charles Ortel $20 to go across the street and bring back, you know, 3 cups of espresso for Jason. I mean, you give somebody $100 million and tell them, why don't you sprinkle it around in 38 countries around the world over the course of the next 12 months where the currencies are doing this, and where corruption is the national sport. You know, right. you have the Olympics corruption. It's a very risky thing, and the standard of care that's required in the United States, you have a duty of care as a trustee, you have a duty of loyalty to the organization, and a duty of obedience to all laws. This is behavior that is just ridiculous, and you know, the last thing a Canadian citizen should want to do is A, be an outside director of this mess, but or B, give it a lot of money. I mean, there's no, you must be so risk prone to do something like this that you can only be engaged in your other activities, you know, that must be even riskier, right? Which raises, I think, a lot of additional red flags about Mr. Giustra and his cronies. If we go to the next.
Can I make one final point before we leave this?
Sure.
Because you already know this, but I'm not sure that some of the crowdsourcers do. When you're giving away $15, $100 million, you have professional accountants and lawyers that will handle this. And they have certain obligations. So there should be a lot of law firms and accounting firms around the world that are sitting on pins and needles, because if they did not follow due diligence, there's going to be a lot of problems here somewhere.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's what, you know, this is going to be, and Barack Obama was fond of talking about teachable moments. I hate the phrase. But this is going to be a very important element, I hope, in draining the globalist swamp, not just simply the one in the United States, but the one up in Ottawa and your provincial capitals, the one around the world, the various capitals around the world. One pseudo-charity that was formed that you'll hear people talk about is this Clinton Global Initiative. We call it down here, I call it the Clinton Grifter Initiative.
Right.
Now, in the United States, the way it works is that if you want to gain a tax deduction for a donation to a charity, you must part with something that actually has the value you claim you gave away. So if you're giving stock, that's appreciated stock in a company, to a charity, you've got to have it fairly valued, realistic value, and you then take a tax deduction against a portion of your income. If you're giving it to a public charity in the U.S., you could take deductions, charitable deductions, up to 50% of your adjusted gross income. If, on the other hand, it's a private foundation, which is what this Clinton Foundation became, I would argue, by concentrating power into the Clintons, you can give up to 30%. If you give money to something that's a fraud, you can't give a penny of that.
You can't take
not one
tax
penny.
deductions against a fraud?
You can't.
That's going to really upset the unrigged people.
That's a bummer, man. And so the thing about that is that the way that works is that if the IRS wants to be aggressive the way it should be, they have a list of all the people who've given money to the Clinton Foundation. It's already in their files. The big
Jason?
Yeah, Jim.
The other thing, the thing that you brought up, you raised a good point. You know how to make a fraud? Well, if you don't file your annual returns for these charities,
yeah,
one year they may let you off. They may let you off 1 year, 2 years maybe, but I'll tell you, there's going to reach a point they're going to knock on the door and say, "This is fraud. We're shutting you down."
Well, it raises a good question, Charles. We've spoken in previous shows quite a bit about the new head of the IRS. Remind me of his name?
I forget.
But has he done anything noteworthy so far?
We don't know yet. He's just, I don't even think he's been confirmed. I think
Wow.
he's been nominated. But it's going to take a while to clean out that IRS because they've had Clinton people in there, they've had Lois Lerner people in there, they've had Bush people in there, maybe protecting the Bushes. It's going to take a while. It's a unionized organization. But why I put this up here is that the Clinton Grifter Initiative, the Clinton Global Initiative, is the primary means, in my view, by which bribes were paid, monies were paid to curry favor with Clinton and the globalists. Okay, let me explain how this works.
Sorry, real quick. It looks like David Carter was the interim head, and a guy named Charles Rettig is
right. He's the one that's
set to head it.
Right. Thank you. So what happened was, on the 9th of August 2010, a new organization called the Clinton Global Initiative Incorporated was established on that date. That's significant because on the 2nd of June 2010, the federal government of Canada gave $2,500 to the Clinton Foundation. And that was under the law prevailing at the time. That then gave cover for Canadian donors to give money to the Clinton Foundation. So the decision by your federal government to make a modest gift to this William J. Clinton Foundation, the 2nd of June, I think, 2010, is a decision that your journalists who are interested in doing journalism up in Canada need to get deeply into that. And here I would implore Ezra Levant and Judy McLeod and Alex Pearson and Charles Adler and others, the former Sun News Network people that I know very well, Brian Lilly, and others need to examine exactly on what basis did Canada's government, what diligence did they do to give cover for Canadian donors on the 2nd of June 2010 and afterwards authority to take deductions against their Canadian tax returns for giving money to this set of frauds, not just the Clinton Global Initiative, but others. So they didn't even file an application with the IRS to be a charity, the Clinton Global Initiative, until after the Canadian government made their small donation. That application, the link is there for you. Look at these purposes. And I can tell you, this is about as charitable as a strip club. I mean, the purposes for which the corporation is established are exclusively charitable and shall include engaging governmental, corporate, and nonprofit leaders, as well as college students. You know, what could go wrong with that? Bill Clinton and college students. And online participants in the development of concrete and measurable commitments to action to address some of the world's most pressing challenges. No part of that sentence describes a charitable activity. You know, a commitment to action is a meaningless concept. It is not something that you can take a tax deduction for. You can't say, I think that I'm going to commit to give you, Jason, 10% of my inheritance when I get it. You know, you can't, that's nothing. I mean, that's an intention. It is not something that forms the basis for charitable activity. And in no place in the Clinton Foundation governing documents does it give the Clinton Foundation power to control this activity. So on the face of this, this is a fraud, complete fraud. And we've been through in the past the Clinton Global Initiative has a database on its website of all of their supposed commitments to action. We've been through some of them, and they're ridiculous. So in this application, I've just pulled out a few things. Bruce Lindsay omits all of the illegal HIV/AIDS work done by the Clinton Foundation from 2003 forward that he was involved with. He doesn't mention any of that. He says he's a member of the board of directors of this new fake HIV/AIDS charity, but he omits, and that's a material omission. Had he told the IRS, a serious IRS, about all of the defects in the Clinton Foundation's work that he was either doing as a lawyer or doing as an executive or doing as a trustee or all the above, from 2003 forward, there's no way that he would have been approved to be a director of this charity or that this charity would have been approved in a real world, fair world. And then we have this gentleman, Eric S. Nonax, who was also involved from 2002 forward as the foreign policy advisor for the Clinton Foundation. Well, if you're supposed to be a library and a research center in Little Rock, why are you hiring a foreign policy advisor for that? That is just not, you can't do that. You know, if you're going to be an archive, just taking care of a whole bunch of papers and records and stuff in a place that may have a restaurant or two and maybe have a massage parlor or whatever else, you cannot hire a foreign policy director. You can't do that. It's crazy. And so then if you go, Jason, we can make this just a little smaller. Sure. On the right-hand side, in this application issued in August of 2010 under penalties of perjury to the IRS by these people, they don't say anything at all about the Clinton Justra Sustainable Growth Initiative work from 2007 forward. We're going to get into that in a second. And they don't talk about this fraud that Bruce Lindsay perpetrated in the UK. And you can't do that. You know, when you go to the IRS and you say, look, I want to create a new charity, here are the key people, you can't, you know, if the key people are in the business of committing fraud repetitively around the world and you don't tell the IRS that, you certainly are going to get revoked when they find out about it. So, and in addition, it's not just about telling the IRS. This charity then solicited in multiple states, and in every US state, you have to explain all these defects. And if you don't do that in advance and you solicit money, then every solicitation, each request for $1, you know, each mailing requesting money, not each receipt. Each time you send a piece of mail, it's a felony.
Charles, something very important came up in the conversation with Charles Walton relative to the Las Vegas shooting. They created like a GoFundMe kind of like pop-up charity to ostensibly help shooting victims, and it was run by, well, Sheriff Lombardo, and I forget the names of the other guy, but they collected 11 million bucks and apparently are just keeping it for now. They're not being, so I advise the crowdsource community to look into that and make sure that that charity was properly registered in each state, because I've got to imagine $11 million, some of it probably came from, if not every, but almost every one of the 50 states. So if that charity, or any charity for that matter, is not properly registered in New York or California, and they go on the internet soliciting money,
big trouble. Big trouble. I mean, Corinne Brown, a congressman, African-American lady who operated with two others a charity a supposed charity in Florida for, I think, 20 years, was indicted days after Dopey James Comey let Hillary off the hook, and she was convicted, and she reported to prison last month. 5 years in federal prison at age 71, a former congressperson. You know, having been in U.S. Congress for 20 years. So there can't be two sets of standards. That the Clintons get to do this, but Corinne Brown's rotting in prison for 5 years at age 71. Right. Now, despite all of these flaws, Lois Lerner's department issued what's called a determination letter. It's conditional approval to operate a federal charity. It was federally tax exempt on the 6th of October 2010. Just when the Canadian government, just when Justra, just when this Uranium One stuff was going on, all this was going on, and we're creating this Clinton Global Initiative, and guess what? In 2009, guess who spoke at the Clinton Global Initiative?
Lois Lerner.
Barack Obama.
Oh.
Right? I mean, so you look at this trail, I mean, you've got to understand what was really going on. We're going to get into this with Douglas Campbell, the informant, and the Justra entities. You've got to understand this rich timeline that goes all the way back certainly to January 20th, 2001, and arguably even earlier. So now we better go. Now this, forgive me, Jason, I know now you're probably looking at this and your eyes are bulging out of your head or something.
Not at all.
All right. And I don't know, Jim, if you can see this page.
Sure.
All right, so what I've done here is I've laid out the actual total expenses of the Clinton Foundation from 2001 right the way through to 2009. And I've grouped it in two subcategories. One in red here, 2001 to 2004, and one in red here, 2005 to 2009, and then I lump it all together. To save you a lot of work here, let's go to the high points. Go to the extreme right, and not because I'm an extreme right person, but just go to the extreme.
I don't know if you're extreme, but you're on the right.
Right. I'd like to say the extreme correct hand column. Look at the percentage that I estimate HIV/AIDS activity, illegal, unauthorized HIV/AIDS activity comprised to total expenses. Look at the bottom-most column.
Wow.
2009, what's going on? Wow.
Right? Now, there was no authority in these years, no valid legal authority for the Clinton Foundation to do anything having to do with HIV/AIDS. Yet here the numbers show, and you won't find these numbers on their website. You have to look in New York State versions of the audits which contain the real audit, whereas the one in the Clinton Foundation, they take out the pages at the back of the audit that allows you to figure this out. Right? They also hide the so-called 990, the annual report for the old CHI that was created March 24th, 2004 and operated through December 31st, 2005. I have those filings. So I was able to rejigger all this. And what it shows is that...
Charles?
Yeah?
That's phenomenal work. That chart you have right there has just saved somebody months and months and months of research.
Right. So on the one hand, it shows that they spent $455 million fighting HIV/AIDS from 2001 to 2009 with no legal authority to do that. That's their declaration. It also shows that they spent $38 million on the Clinton Grifter Initiative conferences, which you may remember the preceding page I showed you. They didn't even apply for federal tax authority until August of 2010. So how do you hold these conferences in 2005, 6, 7, 8, and 9? And how do you, on the forms for this HIV/AIDS entity, the new CHI that I talked about, and the new CGI that were created in 2009 and 10, how do you, on the tax forms, the crucially important federal tax forms asking for federal tax exemption, how do you say in both cases that you had no predecessor activities in these areas when 61% of your action was in fighting HIV/AIDS through a predecessor activity and 5% was in the CGI conference? And how do you spend, if you're supposed to be in Little Rock and a research center and a presidential archive, how do you spend $52 million on travel expenses? I mean, even I would have a hard time doing that. I mean, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So, you know, these are numbers that are out in the public domain. Every single one of these numbers. It's just, you know, you need to regroup them a little bit. I've done it for you, Mr. FBI people, people in the IRS, people in the Canadian government, the French government, the UK government. This is plain as the nose on your face. On December 30th or 31st, depending on which version you want to say is the correct one, the Clinton Foundation, with Bill Clinton listed as a trustee, filed an application for federal tax exemption claiming that it had no predecessor activities fighting HIV/AIDS, when that is a bold-faced lie.
There are so many deficiencies. It's unbelievable.
Jason, if I may?
Yes, King.
$177 million they spent on AIDS related in 2009. And the first thing I keep talking about is a show you guys did a few weeks ago with the different drug companies and how they might be selling watered down drugs. And
yeah,
I read balance sheets, and the first thing I look at is the biggest number. That's $177 million is a big number for some graph.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. So then if we go to page 9. All right, here's this the standard operating procedure the Clintons have is they take bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, starry young people and they say, hey, Monica.
How'd you like to be famous?
Yeah, exactly. You're going to be providing important strategic policy advice to the president. Or
stock up on lip gloss. Here's Barbara Walters' phone number.
Right. But So the pattern and practice the Clintons seem to employ is they take relatively young people, and this Eric Nonak's a nice enough guy, I imagine. His LinkedIn resume, excerpts of it are in quotes here. So he supposedly worked closely with President Clinton between 2002 and 2007 to devise, implement, and manage the international programmatic agenda for the foundation with an emphasis on HIV/AIDS. I mean, is he an idiot? I mean, did he not like check to see whether or not he was allowed to do this? Or did he think, well, you know, I'm working for Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton
seriously, he might have.
Right, Bill Clinton runs the world. He does what he wants. You know, how do you spend 5 years doing this and not, as you're supposed to be a smart, genius person. You're a foreign policy advisor to a former president dealing with the world. How do you spend 5 years doing that, 60 months doing this? And you know, I see he's a scruffy.
Well, he's a fellow bobcat.
But he's a scruffy, you see, with the beard. I call people who, you know, walk around like this scruffies. Typically they wear those cotton or wool hats as well, you know, covering up.
Pink ones?
Different kinds, yeah, not necessarily pink ones. He's a scruffy. But, I mean, if you keep going down this a little bit, Jason, you'll see what I'm talking about.
Well, here.
Yeah. Well, let's actually go back into the slides if it's okay.
Sure.
Because I have it just neatly laid out here. So 5 years he does this, okay? Then he serves as senior advisor to the Clinton Foundation on initiative development. Now, the Clintons are fantastic at using words wrongly, right? There is no such thing in a charity as an initiative. You have purposes, which are legally authorized, or like in Canada, in England, they're called objects. They're the same as purposes. That's what you're authorized to do. What you do in furtherance of your purposes, those are called activities. Initiative has no meaning, which is why they use it. You either have you have purposes and you have activities. On the IRS forms, if you're going to change your purposes, you have to consult with the IRS in advance before doing so. You can't change them first and tell the IRS later. You're immediately revoked when you do that. If you're going to change your activities materially from what you said you were going to do in the original 1023, your application, you've got to inform the IRS. And they never have done this. So here's a guy admitting that he took a job without understanding that the Clinton Foundation couldn't do what he did. And then he specialized in breaking the law from 2007 to 2009, developing new initiatives. What makes this incredibly concerning, and why I'm beating up on this guy, is on this resume as well, it says that he was the managing director for global affairs of a for-profit entity at the same time without disclosing that in the Clinton Foundation filings. You can't do that. Endeavor Financial is a gigantic operation in terms of the scale of its activities around the world. And you would know in Canada, and I know from having been a banker, investment banker, that the Canadian economy is heavily involved in natural resource deals, has been forever, and has developed expertise starting in Canada, but then around the world with your mining engineers and your energy engineers and all that kind of stuff. So the market, it's now, I think, shut down, but up in Vancouver, used to be a very hot and speculative market, which is where Endeavor Financial was partially based, or had operations, I believe. It was a speculative natural resource penny stock market where you would do all these crazy deals that weren't that carefully regulated. And you're not allowed, as I say, you're not allowed to operate a charity, the Clinton Justra Sustainable Growth Initiative, while you're also doing this Endeavor Financial, to which Justra is connected, and people.
Wow.
You're not allowed to do all this kind of stuff without disclosing to regulators in Canada, the US, and states all of these links.
I think we need to make a T-shirt that's a picture of you saying, "You can't do that," but they did it.
So, and Jason,
yes,
there's another thing they do here in Canada that they frown on. With charities, you have to list every one of your bank accounts, obviously. So that you give me $10 million and Charles decides to give me 5, and I don't want to talk about Charles's 5 because I want to get down to Cuba, to make your joke, to visit Mr. Castro.
Right.
And I don't want anyone to know about that.
Right.
Well, in our country, you can't do that, and you have to disclose where the money is. And I understand from my sources, and I don't have Charles's sources, but the Clintons have been a little light in fulfilling that commitment.
Well, that's a great point, Jim. So actually, in our country, you have the similar requirement. It's an onerous requirement that any, not just charity, any person, like individual, corporation, whatever, partnership, that maintains influence over bank accounts in the aggregate having at any time during the year $10,000 in them, has to make incredibly invasive disclosures by June 30th of the following year of every single account, who has signing authority, where is the bank based, what's the address, what was the high balance, what was the low balance, what was the average balance, what was the starting balance, what was the ending balance, you know, and if they're foreign currency conversions, you have to explain all that. And there is no evidence that I've seen in the Clinton Foundation filings that they have ever declared having had a Canadian bank account. So how do you operate the Clinton-Giustra Sustainable Growth Initiative, which is a Canadian entity, without a Canadian bank account? I think that's impossible.
I got a serious question. Because I know from my previous conversations with King James that TD Bank is a Canadian bank, but they got a branch right over here. They're all around New York. Could they have an account there and have that?
No, we're talking now when you operate a charity. Excuse me. The Clinton-Giustra Enterprise Partnership Sustainable Growth Initiative, when you're distributing money around the world, when you go down to Colombia, you can't just, I suppose maybe you can, show up with a satchel filled with $4 million of cash and just start passing it around. You got to change that money for the Colombian currency.
Local currency.
And stuff like that. So you typically, you can't say you're tightly controlling the operation when you have no foreign offices, no foreign bank accounts, no disclosures. No, nothing, right? That's not going to work, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Jason.
Yes,
Excuse me. Scotiabank got in trouble. They have a huge network throughout the Caribbean, so you just can't walk down here to Fredericton and say, "Okay, I want to take $1 million and move it down to, I don't know, pick one," and without following proper procedures. And they have an office set up in Mexico to handle this, and then there was some in the Caribbean. A few years ago, don't know all the details, but they were in trouble, and it was rectified.
Right. So if we just go to the next page, so remember the time frame we're talking about. This is a gentleman around there from 2002 to 2010. Now at the very bottom here, let's just for the fun of it, Jason, let's pull up this link in blue first.
Sure.
Okay, and you know, as somebody who has done a lot of deals but retired in 2002, I look at this list and I say, this is rather special. I mean, this is a tremendous, these are the deals that Endeavor Financial claims they have done. And if you go to the right, the summary thing there, you just scroll down there and you see, you know, here's projects in Russia, projects in Arizona, the Central African Republic. I mean, let's stop on this one for a second. The Pasendro gold mine in Central African Republic, 260 million. Now, the Central African Republic is about one of the most diabolical locations on earth. I don't know if it used to be called the Central African Empire. And that was the one that all their people were bankrupt, but the emperor decided he was going to have this gigantic coronation thing, clothed in gold robes and all this. It's crazy how you get involved in a $260 million deal in the Central African Republic from a Canadian base and not find yourself paying bribes. I don't buy it, right? Then you have here this Bolio copper mine, $850 million in Mexico, another 294 in Mexico.
They're super into gold mines, huh?
All natural resources. I mean, in Chile, you see. Here we have a $150 million deal, the Bima Gold Corporation in Russia.
Wow.
The Kupol Gold Project in Russia, more in Russia, more in Russia. So we don't have to go through every page of this, but this is, I have excerpted from this very long list of transactions where here at Coal Corp, $160 million, $80 million deal in Colombia.
I thought Hillary hates coal.
Right. Every single one of these transactions has a timeline and has correspondence, and it all needs to be investigated. How did these transactions come together? How many Clinton and other connections may have been used to put these deals together? Were monies made on each one of these deals? How were the investments booked? Were they booked through offshore, Cayman Islands holding companies that are very tough to find the profits that may have been created? Were politicians paid off? If so, were they paid off in Canada? Were they paid off in Russia? Were they paid off in around the world and in Africa. This is a
Panama Papers.
long list, a gigantic list of transactions that would put this Endeavor Financial as one of the largest and most successful small boutiques doing this kind of work around the world. How do you get this business away from Goldman Sachs? How do you get it from Morgan Stanley, Lazard, serious firms? I suspect you get it because you are willing to look maybe the other way at some of these tough, it's Ortel, not Ortel, yeah.
Sorry, I can't believe the length of this list, Charles. I'm just scrolling through it. Now, all these gold mines, I need to speak to Quinn Michaels about this because I don't know if you remember, Charles, when Quinn and I went to Leeds, South Dakota, that whole secret lab was built in this gold mine. What's up with gold mines? I don't know. Obviously, there's gold in them, but there seems to be some...
Right. So if we go back into the slides just for a second, because this is the so-called money discussion here. Every single one of these transactions has some potentially illicit link to either a foundation or a donor to the Clintons, to Justra. So Lundin Gold, Richard Pollack at the Daily Caller has written some excellent stories about how this Lundin family, originally from Sweden, has a long-standing pattern and practice of operating in the most corrupt nations on earth, including in prior generation, financing bandit bands, taking over countries and getting, concessions, economic concessions from the bandits when they become the president of the country. So these are very suspicious transactions. Under US law, we have something called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. You cannot do this kind of stuff. You can't hide under the cover of charity to, foment links between Lundin, who was a $100 million pledger, to the Clinton Justra Sustainable Growth Initiative that I don't think lawfully was ever formed. You can't allow this person to get the good PR for doing that, but then mine the connections of the Clintons to get a $450 million gold deal. Pacific Rubiales and Petro Rubiales, these are deals done in Colombia. And you add these numbers up, 200 million, now another 250 is 450, another 50 is 500, another 2.5 billion, 3 billion, another 440, that's $3.44 billion of transactions
it's real money,
in Colombia alone. That we don't know the time lag yet, whether this was during, after, or whatever. Frank Justra was on the board of the Clinton Foundation, or exactly yet the timeline. We don't have. Why don't we know the details? Because you don't get the Clinton emails, because those have been bleach bit and hidden. But the fact is that somebody has a record of how these transactions came together, and it's that record that needs to be fully exposed on these Rubiales transactions. Then you have a $100 million deal involving Uranium One, and you have this UR Asia Energy and UR Asia, the two transactions there. One is a $5.1 billion deal where UR Asia Energy merges with SXR Uranium One, and I think to form Uranium One. We need to go through the whole timeline of how these transactions came together. And if, Eric Nonax was involved in any of these transactions, they all needed to be disclosed in the Clinton Global Initiative filings, in the Clinton Foundation filings, in any other filings where Eric Nonax may have had a leg inside the Clinton Foundation or any of these other charities, if they're up in Canada or elsewhere. I mean, I only spent half an hour putting this list together. I'm sure if you were to go, the crowdsource community were to go through the main link and go deal by deal by deal, we would find all sorts of what are called illegal private gains, and if there are trustees of a charity involved, it's a crime called inurement. When you use a charity to derive a gain through the operation of the charity, that is a crime, a straight up crime. You go to prison for that in this country, and I think you go to prison in Canada for it, and you also pay substantial financial penalties. And the trustees of the Clinton Foundation, for not insisting that these conflicts be fully exposed and disclosed in all the filings at federal, state, and international level, have serious legal liability.
Charles, I don't mean to interrupt you while you're on a tear, but Gear Jammer 911 on Periscope is asking, what was Chai doing in Bangalore? Many accountants embezzled money to contribute to it.
So I was in Bangalore. I don't know that Chai was in Bangalore, but the challenge in India with the Indian vendors to Chai, the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative, the first issue is that what the Clintons were doing, they alleged they were doing, was they were raising money from governments to pay full price for medicines produced by these manufacturers of generic HIV/AIDS medicine.
Right.
And they failed to disclose a business development arrangement entered into in October of 2003 between a crooked company called Ramboxy and the Clinton Foundation, with Ira Magaziner and Bill Clinton arranging that deal. You're not allowed to do that as a charity. You can't be a business development arm for a crooked generic HIV/AIDS drug maker that is also a big provider of generic medicine in the United States, but has failed to do one kind of important thing when you sell drugs, and that's like test any of them. Oh. So they just say, we don't need to test them.
Venture philanthropy.
Right. You know, we don't test. I mean, we don't like tests.
The one other thing I'll say is that Marine Hero on Periscope tells us that old gold mines are used for capturing neutrinos deep underground.
Yeah, that could be. Could be. So if we then keep going, because I'm mindful we're an hour and 45 into this.
Next page.
Yes, please. Okay, so what is this Clinton-Justra Sustainable Growth Initiative? Okay, is it a, well, I would argue, is it a formless aggregation? Is it something that has no legal paperwork? Well, on the 12th of December 2008, in the real Memorandum of Understanding, again, a Memorandum of Understanding in the United States is not a legally enforceable document by design, it's just, you know, to fool people. It claimed that this agreement was an agreement, you know, made it seem like it was a real agreement, an enforceable agreement between the Clinton Foundation and the Office of the President-elect. Now, the Office of the President-elect disappears at the inauguration. It's like these Russian companies, you know, you form them and then they disappear. It's not a real agreement to have a fake agreement with an entity that goes out of existence. I mean, what you would do is you'd say, let's have some real people on each side. Let's make it an agreement where there's consideration and where it's enforceable. And by the way, how come Bill Clinton isn't a party to this agreement? Because at this point, he wasn't, on the 12th day of December 2008, Bill Clinton wasn't an officer, director, trustee of any part of the Clinton Foundation. So he was not even bound by this agreement. And what bright bulb of a lawyer allowed that to happen, both, you know, in the Office of the President-elect, but more importantly in the Senate? How come Chuck Grassley and the other people in the Senate didn't say, wait a minute, this agreement is ridiculous, there's nothing here. But anyway, in it, it says a single entity, the William J. Clinton Foundation, a single entity, nothing about any other entities, is a 501c3 charitable organization comprised of the Presidential Library and 7 initiatives, and initiative number 4 is called the Clinton-Justra Sustainable Growth Initiative. So if I'm not a lawyer, but if I were a lawyer, I'd say, all right, nice piece of paper, show me some proof that each one of these is an actual charity, and show me where it was organized, and prove to me that it was organized lawfully and operated at all times since as a charity. And you can't do that because none of these were, right? So this is all a fiction. And then they describe CGI's, oh, sorry, it's okay, they describe it as follows. It works with the mining industry. The charity does not, charities don't work with mining industries. Charities work to help needy people. You can't, if you're working with the mining industry and you're not disclosing all the context that one of your chief people, Eric Nonax, has through his employment for money at the Endeavor Financial Corporation with the mining industry in Canada.
Buying the mines.
I mean, you can't do that, but they did do that, right? So you work with the mining industry, with local and national governments and other non-governmental organizations to enable sustainable growth. What is sustainable growth? Excuse my language, I know this isn't television, I'd say it's bullshit. I mean, it's not, there's no magic to that term. I mean, it sounds good, sustainable and growth. I mean, those are nice words. But, you know, it has nothing to do with charity, that you're fostering sustainable growth. Companies like to foster sustainable growth. The mafia likes to have sustainable growth. Loan sharks like sustainable growth. I mean, there's nothing charitable about fomenting sustainable growth. So they focus on sustainable growth in countries where the mining sector plays a significant role. Hello, red flag, Endeavor Financial, developing business, investing in mining companies. We're going to create a charity with no paperwork, no legal authority, no controls, no nothing, to operate in these crooked countries, putting together mining deals with no audits, no financial information, no statements about our conflicts.
You must admit they did a good job of sustaining it.
And then it says it's funded primarily by Frank Giustra, Carlos Slim, Lucas Lundin, and various mining-related entities. This sounds to me like a mining deal, masquerading as a charity. It has nothing. It's a mining development problem.
What else does Carlos Slim have investments in, Charles?
I think he had an investment in this thing that used to be something that people read when things were happening called the New York Times. So this thing, this Clinton Giustra Sustainable Growth Initiative, yeah, they filed paperwork up in Vancouver and then later at federal level, but they didn't do so lawfully. And there is a trail, you know. They did what they did. And so the Canadian government, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, in a heartbeat, they can get what they actually filed. They can check every single one of those deals. It's not just about Uranium One and CFIUS in the United States. Every single one of these Endeavor Financial deals and any one of the other deals that Frank Giustra has been connected through Fiore Financial and his other financial firms and Yorkton Securities and other things like that, every single one of those deals, there needs to be a timeline, a chronology, an understanding of how the concessions were obtained, were monies paid illegally by Canadians and Americans to get those concessions around the world. This is a big story. It's well beyond Uranium One, and we need the cooperation of Justin Trudeau, the people up in Canada, to get to the bottom of what actually happened here.
Now, just very briefly, Charles, when I was a kid, I actually thought the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were nothing more than a fictional cartoon police force because of Dudley Do-Right. But I've actually since been to Canada and seen guys dressed up as Mounties. King, help us understand. The RCMP is actually more on par with like the FBI than the NYPD or something like that, right? They're a substantial investigative force.
Correct. They're a national police force, and also they can be the local police force in certain areas, like Moncton, for example. They choose to have the RCMP. Much more expensive than having your own local police force, but that's what they are. And then they have a branch. About 12, 15 years ago, they used to do it all. They were a combination CIA, FBI, state troopers, local police.
That's
and then
dangerous.
They broke it up, called CSIS. And then they split the spies away from the RCMP.
But the body in charge of investigating this would in fact be the RCMP.
Well, I think,
Correct.
well, yeah, that
Correct.
would be one, but I think they also have, different provinces would have investigations they could mount. And
Charles, can I add one thing if I may?
Sure.
I'm just sitting there, and you hit on a real gold mine. Pardon the pun. The provinces are all claiming about fighting with Ottawa, and they need money, and they need money, and they need money, because up here we have a series of transfer payments and equalization payments that get spread around the from the feds to the provinces. Now, if I'm sitting here and I'm a finance minister from BC, and you're telling me that this fictitious Clinton-Giustra affair generated, let's say, just pick $1 billion. The illegal tax deductions that were granted out, to me, if I was a finance minister from the province, I'd be tapping my federal counterpart on the shoulder saying, go get the money or I'm going to charge you guys. Because like you are a federation of 50 independent states. We're a confederation. It's a little different. And the provincial finance ministers would have a lot to say about this if it's proven to be what we suspect it to be.
Right, exactly. And they need to get to work. I mean, oil prices and gas prices are low. It could well be that the United States continues under Donald Trump. We've unleashed this energy revolution. It could well be that we'd have a combination of, new production coming on stream because of what we're doing down here, and adverse reaction to rising interest rates, slumping demand, could take energy prices even lower. And, it's high time for the Canadian government to get on board. The Canadian government, I can tell you, the Canadian government is farthest behind of the ones that I know about that are looking at this. There are other governments that are way ahead. And people are going to be looking pretty stupid here in the end when it might be a smaller country than Canada that gets this ball across the line. It could even be, let's go back to Saudi Arabia. And we've talked about my dear, sadly not departed enemy, Prince Walid in Saudi Arabia, who spent some time in lack of soul cycle, being strapped by his heels in the whatever Ritz-Carlton.
Yeah, the Ritz-Carlton, right.
And getting his head beaten in.
By Blackwater.
By Blackwater. But who knows what information is going to come out about all the crooked deals that were financed by donors to the Clinton Foundation to do infrastructure projects around the world. It might have involved that, what's that Canadian construction company got in so much trouble? It begins with an L.
Lavalin, SN Lavalin out of Quebec.
Right, yeah.
They're everything.
Right. So there are a lot of crooked American and Canadian construction companies that have been doing these infrastructure deals around the world, possibly in league with this Clinton Foundation and Juster and others. So it's high time to step the pressure up here and, let's get some of this missing information. So Jason, if we can go to the next page. Okay, what I've done here, and we're going to fly through this, this is information that is not in the Clinton Foundation filing, that is on their website, but it is on the New York State version of the website. So on the left-hand side, you have words. Remember we said the Clintons are really good with words. And you read this and you say, acting as an honest broker and implementing partner, CGSGI is focused on market-driven development that creates jobs and increases income, comes in on enabling factors such as health and education. That's the kind of stuff where you say, oh, okay, the guy's got a PhD from Harvard. He must know what he's talking about. I mean, this is nothing. It's a word torrent. It means nothing. But you go through, CGSGI is commencing work in partnership with the natural resources industry. Here we have it again. We're developing business with the natural. But look at the size of this total joint venture. In 2007, for all these high-sounding words, they got $100,000 only in revenue. That's it.
Wow.
They paid consultants $38,000. They spent $1,000 on travel. I mean, did they fly down to, on a broomstick down to wherever they went to do any of their work? $198 on rent. What did they rent? A portion of a teepee?
That's crazy.
144 on other. Got to track down that other, and they end up with $60,000. Should say net assets. Sorry for
this. Was 140 lap dances and a Coke.
Yeah. It's just, there's a few typos here, forgive me, but that should be 6195 and that should be net assets. But this is a nothing operation in terms of financials in 2007, right? Remember, in 2007, Lucas Lundin is making a $100 million pledge to this. Frank Schuster is making a $100 million pledge to it. Carlos Slim's making a $100 million pledge to it. And with all that, you decide you're going to spend $100,000.
Back to the Carlos Slim thing. It's, I think there are certain people who poo-poo or just basically completely dismiss the Carlos Slim ownership of the New York Times. But when you start to see some of these deals, how these guys are improperly involved in gold mine deals around the world, you start to see how spending $100 or $200 million for a newspaper that has so much influence over what so many people think, including the prosecutors, including the...
Sure, especially the prosecutors.
Right? So they see it in the New York Times and they're like, well, Charles, Jason, Jim, you guys must be right-wing conspiracy theory lunatics to think that there's anything wrong with the New York Times, Carlos Slim, or having a charity buy all these gold mines.
I mean, the next thing they're going to do at the New York Times is bring back that guy Baghdad Bob to be the editor-in-chief of the place. I mean, it's just but if we go to 2008, the next page. So here, the same story, that's 7, and here's 8. Okay, now, we don't have to hit these links, but there's 2 great stories at the bottom about the Clinton-Schuster initiative done by this excellent journalist, Ken Silverstein, who's got a acerbic wit, and he's a very good writer. But just staying on this one page here, they're spending, they have bigger revenue, $6 million in 2008. Remember, this is the election year. And they spend only $833,000 on direct programs. Again, $445,000 on consultants. And they have an increase in the net assets of $4.8 million. So they don't really do much in 2008. And why did you need $300 million in pledges if all you're going to do is spend $6 million in 1 year? It just doesn't make any sense. And again, here they say, in conjunction with this, some foundation, they began implementing a 2-year, $4 million initiative that seeks to contribute to the development of school-aged children in some of the most vulnerable communities in Colombia, focusing on education, child nutrition, vocational training, and micro-enterprise development at schools in Bogota, however you pronounce that, Quibdó, and Barranquilla. I mean, that's a lot of talk, but for only spending $800,000 on all these projects in one whole year during an election year when somebody needed a lot of money for campaigns, no controls, no nothing, and you're putting these deals together, Uranium One, Kazakhstan, Colombia, all these other deals, it just doesn't even remotely pass the smell test here, right? These financial numbers are hidden on the Clinton Foundation website, so all you see are the words in the 990 that sound impressive, but the scale doesn't match the words. And now if you go to the next page, this is hysterical. You think it was bad in 2007 and 8. How much, Jason, in revenues did they have in 2009?
$1,646.
Right, so yeah, here's Slim has got, I'll give 100. London, I'll give 100 million. Schuster, I'll give 100. Why don't we spend $1,646 this year?
This is for the whole year?
The whole year.
Wow, Crowdsource the Truth is doing better than that.
That's right.
Jason,
Yeah.
that's picking up the beer bottles in the parking lot and selling them.
Yeah, that's right. Homeless people are probably collecting more cans just from the garbage outside on 23rd Street.
Right. So you're spending on this mess here, but look at what they announced they did in 2009. The reason they only spent $1,646, as part of their income generation programs in Colombia in 2009, CGSGI and the foundation of Carlos Slim, I'd love to see those books, announced the creation of a $20 million investment fund. You can't do that, yet they did that.
Wow.
So you're going to create a $20 million investment fund, because that's a lot more interesting. You know, investment funds make money. So you're not going to give it, you'll give $20 million to the investment fund, but only $1,600 to the charity.
But how could it have $4 million in expenses if it's only taking in?
Because it had the money from the preceding year. Remember that money?
Year before. Carry forward.
That's still, I mean, that's what, come on, I could understand it going even 50% down, but
it's crazy. It's crazy. And of course they didn't want you to see this, which is why, you know, it's hidden.
What do you think the real explanation for that is, Charles?
I think this was, you know, they had watched the Clintons, the people around this Clinton-Justrus Sustainable Growth Initiative had watched the Clintons operate in Arkansas as president, when she was a senator, when she's running for president. They'd seen how bankable the Clintons are. They'd watched the Clintons seed, you know, these international organizations, the World Bank, you know, WHO, the UN, UNICEF, all these different organizations around the world. They knew the Clintons had ties in Canada and elsewhere to stop prosecutions. And they say, in Mexico, and they say, well, all right, small amount of money, we don't even have to give it. We'll just say, we'll make a commitment to action. You know, it sounds great. And then we'll get on the gravy train doing even more of these deals around the world. And because Clinton's going to be the Secretary of State, she'll stop anybody from taking a serious look at this. Because Slim has got the New York Times under control, because Obama's got the press bought off, we'll be able to do this, you know, for the rest of our lives. All we got to make sure we do is we elect Hillary in 2016, which didn't happen.
So it's basically just as the scam, as the sort of corporate political culture of scamming becomes more and more mature, they've got so much confidence in it, they could just do whatever they want.
That's right, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
So if we
you
go
know, Charles, after watching it, I'm sorry to keep interrupting, apologize. You know, this gives new meaning to that Hillary's email there that came out in WikiLeaks and said, if Trump wins, we're all going to hang.
Right.
That's right.
Really?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. So here we have the closing slide of the presentation. I've been talking on this show and prior to doing this work with Jason about the fact that the world economy has fundamentally been operating in purgatory since December 31st, 2008. We didn't know whether we were in heaven or hell. We had under Obama, in my opinion, supported by the establishment Republicans, we had a fake recovery. We had central banks coordinating, conspiring around the world to keep interest rates low. We had big governments spending money with abandon, borrowing from the future generations. And the piper is now coming back and interest rates are rising. Here in this first link, Jason, if we could pull this first link up. Here we have Goldman Sachs saying if interest rates on the 10-year, now the 10-year are currently 288. They're saying that if interest rates get to 4.5%, there'll be a 25% market crash. Wow. I'm here to tell you that that's very optimistic. Okay, if we go from 288 where we are now up to 3.5, 3.75, we could have a crash far more significant than that. And it's important to understand when we see these point movements of 100 points, 200 points, that's nothing when the Dow is 25,000. Back in 2008, when we didn't pass stimulus at first and the Dow went down 800 points, I mean, that was a large percentage move. In October of 1987, it was, I believe, a 22% move on the Dow. 22% would be 6,000 points on the Dow. And we haven't come close to that. We had a flash crash in May of 2010 when the Dow was at one point down 1,500, 2,000 points.
But so few people seem to care. It's barely being shared on Zero Hedge.
Well, this is 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday. Today. So typically they may not get as much traction. But this is a very simple thing to think through. We are the largest, deepest capital market in the world. Our interest rate, the interest rate that matters for me and I think for others, is the 10-year Treasury rate. You look at that rate, and that's a rate which you can put money to work, get a return, and not really worry much about default risk, because it's unlikely that the United States would default. It's possible, but it's unlikely. If the reference interest rate on the 10-year moves up, then rates on everything else have to move up, not by exactly the same percentage, but likely by a widening increase. Because as the U.S. gets riskier, then the junk debt premium gets even more riskier. It's not a strict, tight correlation, and equity gets way riskier. So if you have this kind of move, and worse, if the markets begin to perceive that our central bank does not have the ability to stop a meltdown, you could see a massive, sudden change. And people like me and others are watching and warning about this. Now, I got into this whole mess back in 2007, 8, 9, talking about GE. We had the article that I did last week, got a certain amount of attention. But then, just as I had expected, on Friday, GE filed its 10K. You might hit that one, yes, thank you. And they had to announce, uh-oh, that's interesting.
Didn't go?
Well, anyway, you should be able to get it. No, this is, well, if we just go back to the main slides, what that article did, it did work before. I don't know why it's not working now. But
could be this problem from Microsoft Word. Just try this.
Well, it was an article that basically said that GE had released its annual report, its 10K, and it had to admit that they may face action. If you go into Google, actually, and just punch, yeah. Is that Google? Actually, try it in Google, not Reuters.
Isn't that it?
No, you have to go into the main Google page. Well, no, see, I was going to see, yeah, there it is, right there.
That?
Yes, yeah. That's there. So this is saying that it may face action by the U.S. Justice Department for matters that go back to 2007 and 8, i.e. before the rescue. So, I mean, if the Trump Justice Department is looking into GE for this thing, it wasn't a subject last week. This is a new, I mean, may have been buried somewhere in past press releases, but it wasn't at the fore when I wrote the article last week. You know, if this matter is coming to the fore, and I'm going to take a close look at GE tomorrow. See, their 10K filings are very long, so it takes a while to digest everything that's in them. But this is going to create more jitters. And if you look at this, this is a funny link. New management appears to have learned little from the deplorably sideways Immelt era. If you hit this link here, Jason. This is the main GE landing page. Look at the upper left. This insignia is called the GE meatball. That's what they call it. But look at their tagline. It's still imagination at work. You know, and the title of my research was "Too Much Imagination at Work?" ? And I mean, you're not going to change this, having slashed your dividend, had to be rescued in 2008, You really want to run with imagination at work for a business like GE that has shown little imagination that's positive?
Doesn't the logo still look like it's from 1930 or something?
I know, it's one of those things they just don't want to, they don't want to do it, a new Coke, new GE. So if we go back into the slides, I wrote this is a shame, now we're in the shameless plug department of the presentation. I've been writing some articles for this publication, originally started by Laura Ingraham, that now has backing from a Canadian billionaire whose last name is spelled K-A-T-Z, but pronounced Kates, not Cats. And this article, which went up on the 22nd, has gotten hundreds of thousands of views. I know from the people who track this inside the publication. And I do commend this to people out there. I will be writing at least one article with this publication. We have one that went up, another one we'll show you in a second. There's links in this article. So when we put this stuff up, you can go and see, you know, the source materials. As we do in our presentations with Jason, we provide these people links. So I really commend this. If you have time, you'll see, what was that?
A little chair action.
Yeah, so this is one shameless promotion. And then if you go back into the slides, this article just came out this morning, the second one. And we're just going to relentlessly increase the pressure on the Clintons. We're not letting them off the hook. They're going around, they've got their surrogates with a tired argument that, well, the Clinton Foundation has lifted the lives of 11 million people around the world. And that's why they've decided they don't have to actually do any audits or fill out any public filings, because they're lifting lives. 11 million, that's not good enough for you. Next week it'll be 18 million. I mean, you can't, when you run a charity, as the Oxfam is finding out in the UK, UNICEF, other places, you can't just invent words. I mean, you've got to have financial statements that are real firm, checked, and audited to the strict standards that apply in the United States and Canada and around the world. They have never done that. They put fake audits out, which are not accurate. They're not compliant with US or foreign accounting standards. And I say that as somebody who can tell the difference. So then, for fun, I saw this thing. This is, I don't know if we'll be able to get this link, but we'll see. This is the Clinton Foundation raising money right now. You can hit that X if you see that thing. Look at that red button. What does it say, Jason?
Donate.
Donate. Not donut, donate. And they're soliciting as we speak, using the internet.
Oh yeah, and this is that hearing aid company that was like used hearing aids for kids or something?
Well, this is the Clinton Foundation doing this.
But weren't they involved with some hearing aid company?
Varkey. There's Starkey Hearing Aid, and he's also involved with something called Varkey. He likes things that rhyme with Arky. Snarky, Starkey, Varkey.
That's weird.
But you know, you're just simply not allowed to do all this, and yet they're doing it. This piece down here is in the National Review, pointing out, Roy Murdoch is an excellent columnist, pointing out that the Russians colluded with Democrats. That's what we're going to discover here, with the Clinton wing, and to a certain extent, the Obama people. That's who the Russians were colluding with, starting by 2009. And that gets to this whole issue of Mr. Campbell, Douglas Campbell, who came forward late last year, was finally given clearance to speak, has now been testifying in the House and I think Senate. He's talking to his top lawyers, and he is prepared to expose and has chapter, verse, and details on how the Russians, in league with certain interests, I think in Canada, in Australia, and in Europe, and elsewhere, how they were colluding with the Hillary Clinton wing to try to make sure that she was ultimately installed as president, and how they may have been involved in all sorts of crooked money laundering and public corruption deals using the Clinton Foundation, using the Clinton Global Initiative, precisely in this time frame.
I'm pretty sure I met DeRoy Murdoch at the Deplorable.
Yeah, he's a good guy. So if we go back into the old, we'll close by just saying this Zero Hedge is a wonderful publication, this final link here. And all eyes need to be focused on this gentleman, Mr. Campbell, William Douglas Campbell, who has come forward, and we're going to find out more precisely what he knows. And once this information does make it into the public domain, then it will be high time, past time for the Canadian regulators, the Australian regulators, the English regulators, Russians, others, to try to understand exactly how many people were involved in this conspiracy as it unfolded. What did Mueller and the FBI know about all this in the 2009 and 10 timeframe? Why did the United States, we brought this up before, why did the United States catch Anna Chapman June 27th, 2010, and then release her early in July along with her co-conspirators without dry cleaning them, without convicting them, without putting them in jail cells, without cross-checking anything? Why did all that happen? Why was this Campbell guy attacked when he came forward? You know, who allowed elements in the FBI to cooperate in a smear campaign after he started coming forward here? And what is the real story? We're grown-ups here. It's not like we cede, you know, the government over to these Mueller types and deep state people to just take care of business and we don't deserve to know anything. That's not the way the Constitution's set up. We don't have a class of people who are allowed to operate above the law, rip us all off in the name of charity, and get away with it. And that's what this process is all about, Jason. That's what I hope, you know, through the good work of Crowdsource the Truth and Jim up there in Canada and his buddies, that we can really roll our sleeves up together now and put the heat up under Justin Trudeau, under his people, under the provincial governments, under the US state governments, under the Trump administration. We need to get to work and show the world that the United States has not become a corrupt kleptocracy run by politicians, corrupt elements of the media, financiers who are prepared to play not by the rules, and academics and others. We need to show the world what we stand for and what our real values are. And I hope that's something that we will do in this 2018, a crucial year.
Now, Charles, I haven't had a chance to really review this video, but the title sure gives me pause. What do you think about a video claiming that Uranium-1 is some kind of hoax?
I think it's rubbish, but I'm amazed that it has 75,000 views.
Well, that's what I mean, and this is something I want to examine because this is an interesting YouTube channel that you know, these guys were saying that Horowitz was a deep state swamp monster, challenging what our friend Dr. Stevens said. So I'm curious. I'm not sure what the purpose of that channel is, and if they think Uranium-1 is a hoax, I'm perplexed by that. What's the hoax?
Well, again, you know, I'm not sure I have the time right now to watch that, but if I did, I'd want to see how much of their information is sourced. Everything that we just talked about is sourced. Every one of our presentations is sourced.
Always.
You and I are using our names, and others in time will use their names. So I think, you know, we have a record, and at least as far as I have a track record of exposing fraud at GE and other companies, and now at the Clinton Foundation. And let's see the Clintons come back with, you know, some comments about what's wrong with anything that's been said today. Because nothing is.
Yes.
Jason?
Yes, Jim.
If I may?
Please.
Sorry about the noise. My friends have been texting me here. My Canadian friends wanted to ask Charles some questions.
Okay.
Sure.
The first one was statute of limitations. Is there any statute of limitations that could impact any of this? I don't believe so in fraud, but I'm a lawyer. But what do you say on that?
All right. So I'm told, and as concerns U.S. law, that in a racketeering and corrupt influence statute, and also in conspiracies, the statute of limitations is tripped or starts when the conspiracy ends. If the conspiracy is ongoing, there would be no statute of limitations for many of these charges. The other issue is, in thinking this through, of course, there's criminal issues and civil issues. My attitude was, and you know, my interest in this was piqued initially by Peter Schweitzer in his book Clinton Cash. You know, it was my interest was increased by the book. I initially thought, and still think, that the correct way to do this is to instigate our IRS, your tax authority, to go after this charity to prove to demonstrate, ask the charity to demonstrate that it is in fact a charity. To do that, you have to go back to the very beginning. And that's how you get around the statute of limitations. So the simple way to start this is, I think, as a tax case in the US, as a tax case in Canada and other countries. You go right back to the beginning, you get them on tax fraud, and the penalty for tax fraud down here is onerous. I mean, in the case of this Clinton Foundation, it would mean winding it up, massive fines and penalties. It would mean that trustees would have massive exposure, and accounting firms that are deep-pocketed, like Price Waterhouse and others, would have deep exposure. Banks would have exposure. Law firms would have exposure. Donors would have exposure. So you start that way with a tax case, right?
Yes.
And then with criminal convictions obtained around the world on these tax cases, then you do civil actions against the trustees. And with all that, you know, that's a world of hurt.
Our Periscope comments are telling us that there is no statute of limitations on RICO.
Right, that's correct.
Next question, and there's only a couple. The obvious one is, how did they move the money around? Because you know the money's not sitting in Canada. How did they move it around? You got to have friendly banks. You got to have friendly officials look the other way. I'm just asking the question. It was passed on to me. How do you think, sir, with all the expertise you have, how did they move the money around?
So I think what they did is the following. I think, you know, Clinton and Justra and others around this Clinton Foundation love to travel in private jets, right? And so if you're doing that, and it's, you know, normally, I actually have a friend, I won't reveal his name, who got in trouble flying on a billionaire's private jet and thinking no one would notice that he had a whole bunch of Cuban cigars, I think, purchased in Canada that you couldn't bring into the United States, but he did on a private jet and thought he wouldn't get caught. So it's not trivial.
What happens when you get caught with...
You pay a big fine in his case.
Not worth it for cigars.
No, or for anything. But the point is, it is possible that the way this former president and his colleagues around the world might have been able to orchestrate things is moving large sums of money in physical form on these planes. It's possible. Or gold or diamonds or other stuff. You could do it that way. You're absolutely right on wires. It's extremely difficult, except that, as our friend Fabien Chalandon, Inspector Clouseau, over there in France, and if you're listening, Fabien, how are you? He likes us to remind everybody every week that the one area that has not yet been tightened up for moving money is monies moved by charities. So the rules do apply for corporations, for-profit corporations and banks and investment funds, but they don't apply as tightly around the world yet for charities, and that needs to change. So the other way you can move money, and this is it takes a sick mind, and forgive me, it must mean I have a sick mind to be able to think like this. If you have a charity where you're not really keeping track of your accounts, you have spare cash sloshing around, right? You have money that was sent to you that you can't tell anybody that you have the money. So you have the opposite problem of a typical person or charity, and that is you have too much money and you need to figure out a way to get rid of it. And so what you're then happy to do is happy to have friends write you invoices for $52 million for travel when you really spent $5 million. Right?
They did have that whole Travelgate thing. Right. They know travel agents and all kinds of stuff. So
when you see a charity like this with loose controls, the way you would move the money is the first step is you don't declare the money that comes, the real money that comes to the charity. You say you got $2 billion, you really got $100 billion. So you put $98 billion over here in loose change, in gold and diamonds and artwork and real estate and stuff like that. You don't even let it into the charity. Now you got $2 billion in the charity, and you need to spend $1.9 billion. And you can't do that. So you say, give me an invoice for $500 million for HIV/AIDS drugs, but you know, I'm only really going to dribble out $25 million. So you give me an invoice, but I don't necessarily give you $500 million for the HIV/AIDS, but our books will balance. You see, so when you're in a zone here, no independent trustees, no independent auditing firms, immense complexity, volatility in exchange rates, and as I say, no controls, you know, the normal tricks of the trade don't apply. And you have to think, as I say, with a sick mind deviously, how these people would do it.
Periscope is saying they could send a jet filled with cash for $1.5 billion in the dead of night. Just ask Obama.
Last question, Charles.
Yes, yes.
It's and it's an interesting one. We'll just spit it out. What legal authority is going to be able to attack the Clintons and their friends on a global level? Because it's so much more than just an individual country or an individual province. My friend asked, would there be anything that Interpol or the World Bank, the World Court, is there any other agency that you're aware of, the UN, that could expose this?
Well, I think the most powerful way to do this, and we've talked a little bit about this in the past, the most vulnerable people are the people who have given money to the Clinton Foundation via a private foundation. So the Gates Foundation, sitting there with $32 billion in it, right? If the Gates Foundation wanted to do business in Canada, and the Canadian government said, listen, Bill, the reason we put money into the Clinton Foundation is we saw you so centrally involved here, and you obviously did not do due diligence, and therefore, we may not have done the right due diligence, but we're a government, and we want all of our money back from you, right? You have $32 billion. We're not going to chase the Clintons. They're not, but we want, you're sitting there at $32 billion, you do work in Canada, you have tax exposure. Microsoft does work in Canada. We're not just going to sit here and take this. So there are in the United States, these large foundations have $5 trillion in them. That's more than enough money to pay back the people who have been harmed by the Clinton Foundation. And I would strongly urge the government of Canada, the government of France, the government of the UK, these big governments that have been defrauded, to join in an effort of going against the donors and saying, look, we are going to shut you down in our countries. We're going to assess penalties in our countries. There are extradition treaties between the big countries, or among the big countries. So I think that's the most fertile approach. There is to hope for an international solution. I think the international system has been purposefully gamed to make it ineffective, so that these unregulated globalists who've come to the fore since 1988, they love this system. It's like the Wild West in America when there's no sheriff. They love it. There's all this gold out in California and no law. And the same idea in globalism. There's all this theoretical gold from these schemes and there's no regulator. So I think that Canada could be enormously effective here. I suspect, I don't speak on behalf of any government. I'm just a private person, but I think that, I imagine that the Trump administration will be enormously grateful for Canada's assisting and exposing the full extent of this fraud, providing information that we down here maybe won't have, and I think other countries will be. Canada was, and the citizens of Canada were extremely generous to Bill Clinton in his supposed Haiti relief effort that may have gotten together as much as $13 billion that disappeared. I would have thought people in Canada would be hopping mad about that, and we need to put some pressure on Bill Clinton and the former leader of Haiti to account for that $13 billion. So, again,
you're going to have to organize and get people to, get it out to their local level and then to their state level and the provincial level and finally to the federal level, I guess.
Well, thank you, Jim, for coming on the show and for following, in Canada and around the world, all that we're doing. I mean, it's beginning. Jason can say, I don't know where we are in subscribers on.
Well, Crowdsource the Truth is approaching 50,000. We've been suggesting to people that if they want to catch these live streams, Sunday with Charles and the various shows that I do on other days of the week, the live streams are going to be temporarily hosted on 21st Century 3D's YouTube channel, which is just 21C3D on YouTube. Of course, we're on Periscope as well, the VK social media network. So the reach continues to grow. Definitely want to encourage people to subscribe to 21C3D, even just temporarily. I'm not going to put all the Crowdsource the Truth videos there and store them there. We'll just have the live streams there, and then people can get them on the regular Crowdsource the Truth YouTube channel. So hopefully we'll continue to build the subscribers there. Just trying to get around this YouTube censorship, unjust live stream banning, etc. I'm going to take this opportunity, Charles, to also remind people that Crowdsource the Truth is a community-sponsored news resource. Your information, the various CIA whistleblowers, FBI whistleblowers, all the people that we're bringing on the program, people who are being suppressed by YouTube, etc. If people are watching daily and they enjoy the work that we're doing, or if they hate me and want to download these videos to make memes that make fun of me, they got to keep us going. So they should consider becoming monthly sponsors on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, or even making a one-time sponsorship payment on paypal.me/crowdsourcethetruth. And I've added, Charles, as I think you know, this handy QR code which allows people to use Bitcoin. You can just point your Bitcoin wallet at the screen and send Bitcoin to Crowdsource the Truth for sponsorship. We've got the mugs, we've got t-shirts. All of these great graphics can be printed on cell phone cases, mugs, t-shirts. I think they got duvets on there. You could decorate your whole apartment with lovely Sunday with Charles swag. And if people like this graphic, we could put it up there as well. But the subscriber base is growing. People should also, of course, be following you, Charles, on Twitter. You're doing absolutely wonderfully on Twitter. Where are you there? Coming up on Twitter. You are, of course, simply at Charles Ortel, 26,000 plus following you. You've got lots of really informative tweets throughout the day. King James, you're not particularly promoting anything here today, are you? Is there anything you'd like me to direct people to if they're interested in hearing from you or seeing more of you?
I guess for truth, King James at gmail.com.
There you go. People can
I want to
questions and stuff.
Thank everyone, because please understand this is the first time I've done this, so it's a little bit different for me. And I want to thank all the truthers out there for the past 6 months. It's been a pleasure to deal with all of you. And before I leave, I want to leave one last thing. It came off my first presentation we did, Jason. I just want to remind everyone that Bill Clinton did 53 speeches in Canada from March 9th, 2001 to June 20th, 2014, and he was paid $10,478,500 US for a total of roughly $169 a speech. 47 of those speeches were co-sponsored by the Toronto Dominion Bank and his good friend Frank McKenna, the TD Deputy Chairman.
Nice work if you can get it.
That's right.
Yes, I just wanted to leave that with you. Thanks so much, gentlemen. It's
wonderful
been
to
a
have
pleasure.
you.
And just keep up the good work and keep moving forward.
Great to have you on, King, and thank you for revealing your true identity today. Of course, we never pressure anyone who wants to call in anonymously to reveal their true identity, but I do appreciate you doing it. It is, in fact, something that you had promised to do from the very first time you called me. King James is absolutely a crowdsourcer. He's even crowdsource royalty. That's why he goes by that moniker.
Hey. That came from you, my friend. It was your name.
That was my code name. All right, well, Jim, thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you on. And
see you guys.
We'll see you in the chat on YouTube. Everybody should be sure to subscribe to the 21st Century 3D YouTube channel just to catch the live streams. Other videos from Crowdsource the Truth will not appear there. Charles, anything else you want to address before we go? All right, so we'll be back maybe even during the week, depending on what happens, but we'll be preparing some more stuff for next week's Sunday with Charles. We've got a new series with Harmon Wilfred coming up. A lot of exciting things happening this week. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and I will see you tomorrow.